So today on the podcast, we're going to be picking back up the Exploring the Branches of Fundamentalism series. Today on this episode, I have on Seth Laub. Now, Seth is the grandson of the man who first received a call from the Lord to go back to Missouri and begin to establish a settlement of Mormon Fundamentalists. In this episode, we cover the genesis of the move to Missouri, the hardships, struggles, and miracles that accompanied that move out there. From there, we cover other significant events that happened, as what started out as just a handful of family and friends became a thriving community of Mormon fundamentalists. We then finish up talking about how this group of fundamentalists ended up feeling the pull to build a fundamentalist temple in rural Missouri. Now, as you listen to this episode, I think you'll be amazed at how similar some of their experiences have been to those of the early days of the Restoration. That and more on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. Look, it's no secret that our society has become much more crude and coarse. To become and raise men and women of virtue and character is a Herculean task. To help with this, I have recently wrote and published a book. Now, back in the 1700s, Washington had a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. It was a book with 110 rules that talked about how to conduct yourself like a civilized person in society, something that today's society is sorely lacking. What I did is I went back through the book and I reinterpreted his original sayings for the 21st century. So the book is laid out in a way in which you see Washington's original rule. Right below that is my explanation for the 21st century, and below that you'll find 2 or 3 examples of where to use this in the real world. Now, to go along with this, there's a workbook that helps parents teach these principles and practices to their kids. To find the book, go to MormonRenegade.com, go to the bottom of the page, search out the blog post, and order your copy today. I can bear personal testimony from personal experience that this is an invaluable tool to help you raise men and women of virtue and character. Seth, how's everything going, man?
Going good. Going real good.
Good. So I got to tell you, first off, thanks for taking me and my family through the temple when we got there. And just kind of being there as we were there. I really appreciated it. Man, you guys went to town out there in Missouri.
Yeah, that was our pleasure. It was good meeting you and your family.
Yeah, no, so. We really enjoyed it. So I brought you on today to talk about kind of your family and because you guys did something that's very unique in Mormon fundamentalism, which is not so much splitting off from another group. I feel like that happens frequently, but it was the fact that you guys went out there and like left Utah and went out to Missouri and then like carved it out, right? I mean, you guys really went to town on that. And I think that is just so commendable. But when did you guys decide to make that move, right? I mean, it's a heck of a move going from Utah to Missouri.
Yeah. So one thing I can say about my grandpa is he liked to repeat stories. And I wasn't born when, my mom was actually pregnant with me when in fact she thought she was maybe going to have me the first time that she came out, shortly after they bought the place. But I did hear the story hundreds of times, so I can relate kind of what set that all in motion.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll start in Utah. We lived, my grandparents and parents lived in Enterprise, and basically they bought what they were trying to carve out a refuge, right? So it was it ended up being 1,100 acres. It's called Minnetonka. We still don't own it because it's consecrated property, but we still go out and visit. Basically, long story short, I won't go into how we came out of the church. So my grandpa was in the church, found fundamentalism, found the AUB, and him and Owen, or not Owen, but Rulin, hit it off pretty well. He's had a lot of respect for Rulin, has talked in high regard of Rulin. Well, he ended up having a dream that Rulin was standing in the wash there in Matawk when he was familiar with the area because they ran horses and cows. It's about, shoot, as the crow flies, it's probably 40 miles from Enterprise, 40 miles south, in between Enterprise and Mesquite.
Okay.
But he seen Rulin sitting there and in the river, and a bunch of people were coming across the river, and they were scooping up water, and what somebody says, "Oh, this it's gross. It tastes like moss." And then Rulin said, "It won't hurt you. Daryl and Stephen have been for years, the river water there." And then Rulin asked in his dream, this was all a dream. Rulin asked him if he would help him build a refuge. And Grandpa said, sure, in the dream, right? And so he was going to go up and talk to Rulin. They were meeting at prayer meetings on in Salt Lake. They drive up there. So he was going to go up and talk to Rulin about this dream he had. Well, Rulin was murdered, before he got up there. So that was right about the time Rulin was murdered. And so that was kind of the inspiration to buy that piece. So they went down and they looked at it. So it was 900 acres, and then there was another part that was 200 acres. That was like twice as much per acre than it was for the 900 acres. And so they went out to pray about whether they should get the other 200 acres or whether they should just get the 900 and not worry about the 2 acres or the 200 acres. And basically, Grandpa, when they went down, Jim Staley, I'm gonna name names, it's not important, but I will name Grandpa because that's the story that I'm following. So Grandpa Stephen basically went up the road and knelt down and was praying if they should get this property. And he said the Spirit told him that this was the richest piece of property of all of it, so for sure get it. And so they end up buying it, and in his mind he thought gold, right? He was kind of a prospector. I think everybody from that era kind of was. So he was thinking, we're going to find a gold mine, right? on this piece. Well, about 2 months after they bought it, and this is the very top of the ranch, it's the highest point in the whole property. Literally, a spring broke out right on the property line out of the mountain, just gushed out of the mountain. And when it first broke out, it was 400 gallons a minute of water. So a tremendous amount of water. So when they first moved out there, obviously they were hauling water from the river, but I was out there till I was about 16. That's when we finally made it to Missouri. But my whole life we had gravity fed water from a spring, right? So it was just free water, and it worked out really, really good. So that's kind of been like a faith, promoting story in the family. Well, we were just like any other good Mormon family, and that was that Missouri was going to be wiped clean, right? The yellow dog, not so much as a yellow dog. And well, Grandpa they were basically hunkering in to build a refuge, right? You'll see a lot of Mormons around that time. Yeah, refuge was the idea, I guess.
Yeah, this would have been
like 84? A lot of people my grandpa's age. It would have been, oh no, this would have been before that. I don't even know, like 80s, Okay. Well, actually, no, it would have. Yeah, you're right. It would have been 84. Right, yeah, where we are now.
This is in the peak of the Reagan years during the Cold War, right? And like I wasn't very old, but I was probably, I don't know, somewhere between 6 and 8. And I remember, it was kind of palpable, right? I mean, everyone was worried about going to war with Russia and exchanging nukes. So is that kind of what they were seeing? Is that what they were preparing for? Did I lose you? Seth?
Yeah, you lost me for a second there.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Anyway, that was about 84. And I remember as a kid, everyone was convinced we were going to go to war with Russia. Right.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what they were hunkering in for, was that exchange, so to speak?
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that the story is he started they had a united order. So there's about, well, let me see, about 4 or 5 families. They had a united order they were working together with, and Grandpa was working on a cellar up by King Springs. He put his homestead just right by the spring that broke out of the mountain. So he was at the top of the canyon there. And he was building a homestead, and he heard a voice calling his name, and he said it was an audible voice to him. And so he thought it was someone from the house, and he went down to the house and asked if wives were calling him, or if anybody called him. They're like, no, we weren't calling you. And so he went back up, and same thing, he heard his name being called again. So he went back down to the house. Nobody called him down there. So he brought one of his kids up, one of his daughters, to listen. And when he heard it, he asked her, did you hear that? Is that what someone called my name? And she's like, I didn't hear anything. And so he ended up working on the cellar for about 2 or 3 days, the way he related the story to me. And all of this is from my perspective. So I guess I should get that out right now. This is how I seen it. This is the way I remember it. So, everybody has their own story. I guess this would be the way I seen it. But about 2 or 3 days, he kept hearing his name being called, and he was starting to wonder if he was, going insane. He was just troubling him. So he said he sat down and started trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. And he finally decided that he felt like it was coming from the mountain where the spring had broke out. It's called King Springs, is the spring, the mountain, the King Springs mountain. And so he decided to go up and pray, go up and see if he could figure the origin of the voice. And so he said he hiked up the mountain, and he got up there about 3/4 of the way up, and the Spirit told him to remove his shoes and remove his coat. Kind of a Moses thing, right? Holy ground. Right. And so he did that and went forward and then knelt down. And this was also an audible voice, according to his testimony. And he was told to go to Missouri and buy a farm. And so he went back down the mountain, and this was in the morning. He went back down the mountain, and Bruce and Kent were two of the families two of the men that they had the United Order with, they were working with. They asked him what was on the agenda for the day, because they were working in the United Order, and he says, well, I just heard we're supposed to go to Missouri and buy a farm. And so Bruce asked him, well, Missouri's a big place, where at in Missouri? And Grandpa just said, I guess in Independence, right? That's where Mormons are supposed to go. And Bruce says, well, you probably better go back and, ask him exactly where we should go. It's a big state, So he went back up the mountain and asked, and he was told, and I don't remember if this was an audible voice, this part, or not. I honestly don't. I know the other part he bore testimony was audible, and I don't know if this was the same. But when he back up the mountain, he was told to go to the house and get a map, and he would show him where to go. And he said it was about 100 miles south of Independence. So he went back to get a map and asked the girls, his wives, he had 2 wives at this point, asked them, if they had a map, and both wives said they didn't have a map. And he said, well, God, told me to come look at a map, so we got to have a map, otherwise right. This whole thing is. And so finally, I think one of his wives says, well, I have a map of the whole United States, right? So it's just a little map of the whole United States. So Missouri was just, a couple inches big,
right.
And So they knelt down around that. That was the only map they could find, and they started praying. And he said when he opened his eyes that Nevada, the locals out here call it Nevada, but if you're from there, it's spelled the same as Nevada. Sure. So he said Nevada stood out like in 3D off the map. When he opened his eyes from their prayer, it was standing out 3D off the map. And so that was kind of their answer. Well, we're going to Nevada, Missouri, right? And so they basically, at this time, Rulon had already been killed, and Owen, Grandpa and Owen had been button heads pretty good. They'd had, they didn't get along like he did with his older brother.
Sure.
But we were still in the AUB for all intents and purposes, all our group, for all intents and purposes. That was so the next morning, or they went in to buy tires, and then when they headed out, they called, Grandpa called Owen and basically said that God told him to go to Missouri and buy a farm. And Owen flat out told him at that point, he says, well, you guys can go out and look around, but we don't want any of our people back there, period, right? And so they said, all right. I think there was 5 or 6 of the men that came out. It was pretty much my grandpa, his brother, and then their oldest son. So my dad was one of the men who came out to look at the property, or to look for property the first time they came out, which would have been, I know it was deer season out here when they came out, so it would have been just later this year, late fall.
Gotcha.
And so I hope the story ain't too boring, but
no, this is fantastic. This is great. This is good stuff.
I guess this is why we're here. Anyways, it's hard to know when you've heard it 1,000 times, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, this is fascinating, dude. This is the sort of stuff I really enjoy.
Okay. I'll try to put some energy behind it.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. Don't sweat it.
Anyways, so I think there's 5 or 7 of them. It, like I says, non-important, but that came out. It was and when they got here, so it's interesting enough, it's hard for me to comprehend, but they actually had a lot of fear of the mobs in Missouri, right? Even then, like, it's just kind of inbred in us, it's just but they stayed in Fort Kansas and the night, said some prayers, and the next day they went out, and as they were driving onto the freeway, they seen a realtor's office there when they finally made it to Nevada, right? And so they stopped right on the on-ramp, back to back down. Grandpa and I think Kent went into the realtor's office and asked him, if they had any land for sale, which is kind of a funny question because it's a realtor's office, right? So the realtor man said, he's like, yeah, well, what are you looking for? You're looking for cleared? And Grandpa's like, well, maybe. They didn't know what they were looking for. They're looking for where God was, putting them. That's what they're looking for. So he says, well, you're looking for trees? And he said, well, maybe. And the realtor started getting frustrated with him, like, you got to give me what you're looking for so I could tell you my options. Well, they were taking quite a bit of time in there. And so Bruce came in and he noticed an ad for land on the bulletin board as he walked in the door. And so he pulled that off the board and handed it and said, well, what about this piece? And the realtor is just like, oh, that's out of date. I don't even know why that's still there. And he wadded up and threw it in the garbage. And Grandpa said when that happened, the spirit told him that's the piece. Oh, wow. And so they're like, well, that's it. And the realtor's just like, he's like, really, you want the only piece that I can't give you? Because he's like, the listing's old and I don't even have the guy's number anymore. But they had somebody's number that they could get a hold of the guy. So he gave him a number. They ended up tracking the guy down. It was still for sale. And they ended up making a deal. And I can't remember. I think they had to come up with 30,000 or maybe it was 20,000 down. So they gave him a down payment. So, I mean, everybody was poorer than dirt in the 80s. So yeah. They didn't have any money at all. But they ended up putting as what they could down. And then they they said that they would come up with the rest in 3 months, I think. And
so Seth, how, like 30,000, that's a lot of money to come up with. How did your family do that? Did they have the funds in reserve?
no, and it was actually, they had to come up with $30,000 in 30 days was the agreement they made. That was the agreement. And so when they got back to back home to St. George area, Grandpa felt inspired that he could find the money in Salt Lake. He could so as what happened is they actually did that converter run, which brought more money than it had ever brought. It was like a $13,000 converter run. And then but they were still short, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was praying, and he was told to go to Salt Lake, and he would find the rest of the money in Salt Lake. So so he went up to Salt Lake and checked with all his original sources. He knew some people in the Salt Lake area that he had borrowed money from before. Anyways, he ended up having no luck there. And so when he was praying, he was told to go to the Petersons. And Kent's mother and father were part of the Peterson group, the branch.
Okay.
And so they went and stayed with them and asked around the Peterson group and didn't have any luck. And so when Grandpa was praying, the Spirit basically told him that there was more than one Peterson in the Salt Lake area.
Okay.
And so then he remembered that he had a friend. I can't remember what his friend's name was, but he had a friend there in Salt Lake that knew a Peterson family, a man by the name of Escrow Peterson. And so Grandpa and them didn't really know him, but they had a good friend that knew him. So they got in touch with him through their friend. And this man had, like I said, he invented a potato picker of some kind, something to do with potato harvesting. So he just had come into some money, but they didn't have any luck at first. Well, that next morning when they were getting ready to leave, the Escrow Peterson actually called him and said that the Spirit had told him to give them $20,000. So between the 20 he gave them and the 13 or 14,000 from the converter run, that was enough that they came out. It was actually over enough they came out and put the down on within 30 days.
Wow. And here's the other thing that strikes me about this, right? Well, first, let me clear this up. This Escrow Peterson, was he part of the Peterson group, or was he just a different Peterson altogether?
I do believe he's a different Peterson altogether. I'm 99% sure he wasn't part of the Peterson group or even the same family, right?
Gotcha.
They might be related, but I don't know.
Gotcha, 10-4. But here's the other thing I was thinking, Seth. We talk about $30,000 today, and it's still a good chunk of change, right? I mean, that's not a small amount, but we're talking 1984, right?
Yeah.
So that amount must have seemed even more, just almost unattainable. So the fact that they're able to round up $30,000 in a month in 1984, that's nothing short of miraculous.
To add to that, when my grandma tells the story that when they were heading out to Missouri to look at the piece, or getting ready to head on a trip, she said that she needed a couple of bobby pins for her hair, right? And she said she just didn't dare even ask for that. That's how broke they were, right? Just a couple of bobby pins. So that's where they were financially, if that gives you an idea.
Dude, and this is the thing I love about Mormonism, is that unlike a lot of other groups out in Christendom, right, who kind of think that, the days of miracles have maybe passed us over, we just keep seeing this, right? Now, your father didn't have to, or your grandfather didn't have to build a ship like Nephi did, but he definitely saw something just as miraculous by having that amount of currency drop into his lap, considering what you just said, that your grandma didn't even dare ask for money for a couple of bobby pins for her hair. I mean, that is That's nothing short of miraculous. So
Yeah, yeah, a lot of miracles. It's you know, from the way the story has been handed down for sure. Um, and when Grandpa and them got back from buying the piece, you know, from basically putting the first little bit down, and then said they'd come back in 3 months and put the rest down. Um, he went back to Salt Lake and basically they did a prayer meeting, which I didn't know at the time, and now I know because I have been through the temple. Because Grandpa told the story and I didn't understand at the time, but he says, you know, he went to a prayer meeting. I didn't know what that was, and he says he asked Owen, you know, well, we bought the land. I know you told us, you know, you can go look around, but we don't want you buying anything because we don't want any people back there. And he said, you know, we bought the land. You know, do you want me to kneel outside the circle? You know what I'm saying? You good feelings, right?
right.
And he said, Owen told him, well, are you a brother or aren't you? And he said, well, I'm a brother. And he says, okay, you can come stand by me. And so,
Nice.
but honestly, that was kind of the from then on, there was a lot of button heads, right? You know, a lot of friction.
Right.
And sometime, I don't know when this happened. It's like almost as long as I can remember. I actually did a Saturday Sabbath as a kid, and I don't know when Grandpa and them started doing a Saturday Sabbath, but interesting. That was kind of to the first men who came out, that was kind of what they had in common was they were doing the holy days. They were keeping the Seventh-day Sabbath. They had kind of pulled, you know what I'm saying, to that.
Right.
And I don't know when that happened, but most of my childhood memories of going to church was my mom would take her kids and we'd go up to Grandpa's on Saturday and we would have church up there. So a lot of my I would say the majority of my theology actually come from my grandpa as far as from those meetings, right? And that's why I heard this story over and over and over again as a really young kid. Like, says it's been a long time now, but I heard it so many times as a young kid. And the growing up at Mataqua, there was quite a bit of friction between some of the other families that was there. Basically, the same stuff, right? That Grandpa was deceived. It was a deceptive spirit, you know, because they're going against the priesthood. And I grew up, you know, as well, keeping the Saturday Sabbath. And so my dad had 3 wives, or has 3 wives. And, you know, there was always kind of a split in our own family. And I find it interesting looking back now because I would get in debates all the time as far back as I can remember with my brothers and my friends, right? You know,
Right.
whether Seventh-day Sabbath's right or, you know, Sunday's right. And, you know, and so I think it's really interesting that I feel like God was definitely preparing me personally to be able to handle conflict, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I had my own brothers, you know, on the other side of these issues. But long story short, Missouri was always something that, as far back as I can remember, was something that that's where we were going, right? It was Zion. It was the plan. And, you know, there was a lot of criticism on that growing up. That's how I felt as a kid.
Sure.
You know, a lot of, most of my friends would, every time you'd go, they would say, you know, oh, you're going to misery. You know, they love to jab at that. It's misery,
Sure.
you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So, but after they bought the piece, and I actually have a journal entry. Kent is probably the only one that the Laubs don't keep journals.
Okay.
At least, well, we do have some that do, but
I was going to say,
but I had
welcome to 90% of Mormonism. We all should, and we all fall short on that. So,
but that next summer, so we bought the piece in the fall, and then that next summer, all those men brought their whole families out to look at the piece that they had bought. And I have some journal entries from Kent, which I think are kind of cool. They kind of share what the men were, you know, their hearts and what they were feeling at the time. So this is June 10th, 1984. So they all went out, they traveled out to Missouri in some school buses. It's kind of like a United Order thing. And like I said, I was born July 20th of 84.
Oh,
So
okay.
my mom actually thought she was expecting me at this time, and she actually thought that that she was possibly going to have me in Missouri. Um, anyways, so this is June 9th, 1984. Journal entry by Kent Andre. Got a bunch of groceries this morning and got out to the property in good time. We we thanked God for his blessings on our trip. Missouri is so beautiful and green, and we camped out on the little east meadow that was east to drive that was easy to drive off the road past Pate's Orchard. Reading out loud is not my strong point.
You're good, dude. You're doing just fine.
Bruce and I and Dean, so Dean's my dad, and some of the other children set up 7 big tents. Daryl went off to find a water source. I can't write here the feelings of gratitude we have to God for making all this possible. It is very beautiful. And then June 9th again, Sabbath, we had a meeting in the bus this morning. And Stephen said when he went out to pray this morning, well, I'm reading someone's handwriting, so it's hard to read.
No, you're just fine.
All right. Stephen said when he went out to pray this morning, he was informed that he was camping on the front lawn of the temple. We were all very excited, and afterwards went up here on the hill and climbed a big tree and saw that it was the highest point for some distance in every direction. The view was beautiful, and it was very amazing how much flat room was on top of the hill. Stephen said that the hill had water-bearing rock and would be a good water source, and we should have a water source on the inside of the temple. We went on a few hikes around.
Now that's cool. Let me stop you right there. So one, just the fact your grandpa just listened, right? Just went for it. That's cool. And then you have this group of families that move out. And if there's one thing about Mormonism that always intrigues me, it's the cycle. It's almost secular, right? Is that there is a new trek to make. There's a new place to settle. And the other thing is that the fact your grandpa had the faith to do that, man, that's straight up gangster, right? Like, we're going to cut ties with everything we know, and we're going to move out here because God told us to do it. It's just cool. And I also think it's cool that from the Lord, they seem to get these, like, right away. The first thing the Lord tells them is, there's going to be a temple right here. You're camping on the front lawn of the temple. And someday there's going to be a temple right here. And so, again, it's very reminiscent of when Brigham gets to Salt Lake, right? I mean, first thing he does, he's like, that's where we'll build the temple of our God, right? And he points to the temple lot there in downtown Salt Lake. So I find all this very fascinating that the Lord is just repeating this over and over again. Every time he feels like he needs to move a branch of people for whatever reason, it's the same pattern over and over. Let me ask you this real quick before you go on there. What about the prophecies? Did your grandfather, did any of those early folks out there ever have worry about, like you were talking about, the yellow dog prophecy of it being swept clean?
Oh yeah. And so after, so that led them into actually researching a lot of these, to be honest, interesting traditions, right?
Right.
And so Kent actually wrote a book, but it's a lot of his work that I've used. They actually flushed out a lot of this. I've actually noticed a common thing whenever. So this has been a huge battle with my wife's family. Man, it's just like you just know you're not supposed to go to Missouri. Like, I don't know if it's still that way because I'm so far removed now, right? I've been here so long, and I feel like that the stigmatism maybe of just being here so long has kind of just worn it down. Maybe it hasn't. It's been a long time since I've brought this up. But it is just something that everybody knows you don't do. And yet when it's challenged, right? Well, where's the scripture that says that? Where's this coming from, right? It all falls on its face real fast. And so Kent did a lot of really good work actually tracking down the yellow dog, and it doesn't exist, right? There's only one place you can find it that somebody attributed that Joseph or that Brigham Young said something about a yellow dog. But the yellow dog is interesting to even look at that and try to find where it came from, because it just pretty much, there's nothing there, you know?
Right.
So they actually, because of, you know, what God told them, that started on this journey of actually relooking at, you know, some of these things with new eyes. And I think that all fell over for them pretty fast as far as being swept clean or wiped clean. You know, I felt like they end up taking the stance that the Civil War did that, right?
Well, I think there's, and I'll be releasing an episode here in a week or two with a guy who is a mainstream LDS guy, but he's out in Rexburg, and he wrote a book about the prophecies of Joseph Smith that were fulfilled. And one of the things he mentioned in there was Missouri being swept clean, because just that, the Civil War, because the Missouri was the kind of the breadbasket of the Confederacy. And so when they were, you know, instituting total war, they were like, burn it. We don't want them getting grain. We want to cut off their food supplies. And Joseph did make a prophecy to the effect of Missouri would be wiped clean. And you remember Donovan? It was like his attorney or something.
Yeah,
and
told him not to. Yeah.
Donovan had actually said, as he looked over the destruction there towards the end of the Civil War, he said, "Gentlemen, today the prophet Joseph Smith's words are fulfilled." And so, yeah, I think there's ample evidence that already happened. But I still think it shows, and I think this is a lesson we can all take away. As your progenitors are moving out there, they don't know that this prophecy's already been fulfilled, right? They have no idea, but they feel like the Lord said, "You go here." And even though everything in them was probably like, "Are you sure? I mean, we know what's supposed to happen in Missouri, right?" and they had enough faith just to say, stand where the Lord tells you to stand. Right. And I think so often that's such an important point. We sometimes try to think we have it all figured out, that there's no way that could be. And you just got to stand where the Lord tells you to stand, and he'll take care of the rest. And so I think it's a great example of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, and that's one thing that I probably should track on, because it's another thing that has to do with the temple. Because Grandpa had another dream. This would have been shortly before they bought Mataqua or while they're building Mataqua, but he said he's seen a big temple. He's seen a temple amongst big oak trees.
Okay.
And they actually leveled off a place in Mataqua to build a temple. So building temple was always in his heart. You know, that was always something that they had felt called to do at some point. But it never worked out right. It never felt right till they come to Missouri. And then he had this other experience right when they first showed up. It's like, oh, here's the oak trees, right? So a lot of things started falling into place there too. That was previously like, and that seems like that's what God's definitely done in my life, where he plants little seeds, right? And it all comes together at the right moment to give you, you know, the confidence you need to move forward. So there was quite a bit of that, I think, that they had as well.
Nice. Anyway, yeah, continue on with your story. This is fascinating. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I had to point that out or I'll lose my train of thought.
Yeah, I can talk a lot and I can talk fast, so stop me whenever you need.
You're just fine. You're doing great.
Anyways, like I said, so the first families that moved out were I think Uncle Daryl's, that was Grandpa's brother, moved out with his families. He had 2 wives. Kent and Bruce moved out pretty immediate. And they started their United Order out here. But I didn't actually, you know, my dad didn't make it out until, it was probably 96 when I moved out here.
Okay.
Dad had a heck of a time getting his family out. You know, there was a lot of this, like I'm saying, you know, false and delusive spirits, you're being deceived. You know, it's got to be swept clean. So the family, my mom ended up just moving her kids out. Dad kind of moved the wife that would move out. And then he was going back and forth for a few years. 2 wives stayed. And then they finally got the courage to just, pretty much the one that was having the hardest time was pretty much told that the Lord said, I'm taking care of you here. I can take care of you there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gave her enough that she needed to come out. And so, like I said, but I had my heart was tied to Mataqua for a lot of years. I loved Utah. I loved the mountains. It was actually really hard for me to adapt to Missouri as my home. It's finally taken root, but it was not an easy transition. Mataqua was 1,100 acres and is surrounded by hundreds of miles of BLM land. We did, horse riding and dirt biking and whatever. And it was just, and I still miss that with all my heart, just being alone. But then I also see that you can make a living here, right? We're 30 miles out in the desert on a rough dirt road. It's really hard to make a living. Right. So you kind of, there's always a trade-off. In other words, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Anyway, so I don't know exactly how things went before I showed up, right? We coming to Missouri was always a plan, and we would usually come out about once a year, Thanksgiving or something, as far back as I can remember. And we'd play with our cousins out here and whatever. And I really don't know how they functioned, other than it was United Order. And at some point it kind of broke apart. Mm-hmm. And then the other big families that moved out here, Joseph Zitting moved out here around 1990, and that's Charles Zitting's son. Okay. And he was kind of interesting enough. That was when I said that he got into the kind of the holy days at the creek, right?
I'm sorry, and this is why no one should feel bad about this. Is he coming from the Centennial Park, or is he coming from the FLDS? Where's he coming from as he moves to Missouri, and what prompted him to do that? Do you know? Or
I don't know his story. Okay. So I won't try to tell it, and I don't know
that's good.
The ins and outs of his history. I do know that someone had asked him to look into the holy days at their group, and he looked into them, and it kind of converted him on doing some of the holy days. So that kind of started isolating him from the group, from his, I think that was kind of the start that isolated him a little bit. And once again, these stories, that's just can all be, that's just from what I know, which ain't very much.
Sure.
And anyway, another man that got acquainted with this and family still here is a man by the name of Leland Williams. And we had sent Leland, the order, the United Order picked one man to go take some law classes that were being offered somewhere here in Missouri. And that, I know that's where Joe Zitting kind of got associated with us, because he came to take the same classes, right? And he met Leland, and Leland's like, hey, we're over here in Missouri, and they hit it off, and then they found out, all that they had in common. And, so then he moved his family out. And then another big family was Tom Williams. And they moved out in 94, 95, I think, somewhere in there. And that's a different Williams family. So there's two families that are with the last name Williams, and they're not related.
Oh, okay. So. Bet you that made for some confusion up front.
Yeah. But anyway, so that was, and the Williamses, and so all this is important, for how we function together, I think, is why I'm sharing. Sure. I guess if anybody's wondering. But then Dad moved his family out, and that was another big family. And we moved out, like I said, I think it's probably somewhere 96, 97, somewhere right in there. And that was another big family. So we had several big families move out around that time, I think, which kind of, and that's what I'm familiar with. So that's the landscape that I'm familiar with. And we had a little church building that we were all pretty united in, right? We all just met together, all those families. The order had kind of broke up, like all United Orders do, But they were still meeting together in the church. Had a little church building built the time I got here. So when we would visit, they would just meet in a house. The biggest house we had, that's where we did church. And I remember coming to church meetings there. But the time I moved here, there was an actual little chapel built. And so we'd all meet in there, and the way, all those families that I talked about would pretty much meet together. And we all met, we were doing a Saturday Sabbath. So it's kind of interesting. And man, I don't even know when my grandpa made it out, but he was almost the last one to actually physically move out here. And he spent a lot of time, I think, trying to help hit some of his kids that were stuck out there, and also he was trying to get money to build a temple because he had that dream. So he had some mining prospects that fell through, and nothing seemed to really work out. But I know he talked about wanting some equipment to dig out the hole. So he ended up working and getting a track hoe. He moved out here and some stuff. But he was actually, like I said, the last one to move out here, which I think was really good in a lot of ways, because he was already accused of being, the big head honcho, the leader of the, all the people out here, and he was never even here. So that just wasn't the case, right? I don't know. It was probably around 2003 or so. Some of the brothers out here started reaching out to the AUB and wanted to basically rekindle that connection.
Right.
And it's been 2004-ish, somewhere in there. And so kind of and I actually should say that the AUB had actually set Darrell apart as a bishop for Mataqua, and they had made Darrell and Steve 70 apostles, ordained them 70 apostles. Interestingly enough, they had received their high baptisms too, but hadn't got any second anointings or anything. And Grandpa and them, I know what it is now. He shared that they had a high baptism. I know what that is now, but I didn't know then, right?
Right.
So interesting there. But anyways, back to the story. They kind of established some ties and somewhat of a branch, I guess you could say, out here of the AUB, right? So started up some relations with them, and the AUB was obviously against Saturday Sabbath, and so they started up an actual Sunday Sabbath. So then for quite a few years we had Saturday Sabbath that kind of the community was doing, the original kind of the founder people, and then they had Sunday Sabbath that the AUB people were doing. So it's kind of like a little schism there. Not really, like we still did everything together, all our dances and everything would do together because it's family, right? Family and friends. But there were those that were trying to honor kind of the quota of the all-word group, for lack of a better word. And we had kind of a thing in my family that was kind of is an idea, I'll put it that way. It was an idea that the man, being the patriarch of the family, could seal marriages, right? Because we had kind of been outside of, I guess I'll just say, fullness of priesthood, trying to function outside of fullness of priesthood, right? And so I always figured that when I got married, I would just have my wife's father seal us, and that'd be good enough, right? I think it's kind of interesting what God did to me personally, because my first wife, her dad was actually dead, so that little loophole that I thought I had didn't work out for me, right?
Yeah.
So obviously being sealed is important, and so I started looking at the AUB to be sealed, right? Because I wanted my marriage sealed. Right. So we got married. And just had our bishop marry us here for time, and but we started working towards trying to get a relationship so we could go through and get sealed by the all-word group. And man, I think I got married in 2004, and oh, it's my memory so bad. I don't know if I went through. I don't know when I went through. It would have been probably a couple years after that.
Okay.
Um, I want to say 2008, but that sounds too late. But anyways, it was sometime between 2004 2008. Um, but we started working with started kind of open up this communication, and um, around I cannot remember when Grandpa actually officially made it out, but it probably would have been around 2008ish. And he came out and he started uh digging the hole out on the temple, right on the basement up
Okay.
there, because it's solid rock. And at this time, like, it's hard for me to think now, but at this time, to say the word temple would make you feel uncomfortable around anybody in the community, right? You just, so the
Right.
temple is always in it was always in our hearts, especially kind of my mom's kids, because like says we had kind of been raised by Grandpa religiously, right? So we kind of had his concepts in our mind. I always joke that I was my grandpa's most faithful apostle, even though he never noticed me, because he always worked with my older brothers, Flint and
Okay.
Slade, and I was always just a young pipsqueak that was just there. But I'd always been interested in gospel things. I always like, I can remember when we went camping, when we were in Mataqua, we went camping at a place called Aspen's Park. And it was Saturday, and Grandpa kept a Saturday Sabbath no matter what. And all my friends went hiking, but he was preaching the gospel, and I just stayed and listened, right? I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing the gospel. So I was kind of different than some of my other friends my age.
Sure.
But I had a lot of high respect for my grandpa. And I still do. Like, he's always been a someone I've tried to aspire to. Anyway, so we had myself and some of the family would talk about a temple, and it would literally just be awkward. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know if you ever had anything like that. But it's almost just like you can't even talk about it. You can't
No.
say the word temple, or everyone gets uncomfortable.
Yeah. No. In talking with Michael Ness about the Musser years, I can see why that would be, right. Being a convert to being the only Mormon on either side of my family at all, some of those things that you relate to is hard for me to understand, just because I didn't grow up Mormon of any stripe, right?
Right.
But after talking about Musser like we did, those 2 episodes, I get where it comes from, right? Because the idea was always, because this came from upper leadership in the LDS church during Musser's younger years, where it's like, look, just keep your family records and just know this is going to be over quick, and we're going to bring you right back into the church. And so I
Yeah,
think that's
exactly.
that's a holdover, where it's like, well, are we supposed to build temples? Are we not? And so I think it did create some uncomfortability there. I could be wrong on that assertion, but that's kind of the vibe I got.
Yeah, and then the other thing is our priesthood head, so to speak, had absolutely said no. We weren't even
Right.
supposed to be here, right? Much less be building the temple, and we didn't have the authority, and we really didn't, right? We had a 70, that's what we had, which is why I had to kind of look to be sealed somewhere, when push came to shove. But anyways, so when Grandpa came out, he's getting old at this point, and he started digging the foundation out, and he actually had a stroke just either right after he started digging the basement out, or during, right? Because I remember we were trying to build relationships with the Allward group again. And a lot of people were kind of upset with, he was up there digging, right? That's not helping. I could hear the hydro hammer going, because it was a hydro hammer on a track hoe, because it's solid rock. The basement was solid rock. And so I laughed. Even at the time, I laughed. It's like, we're trying to build relationships, and Grandpa's just I got to get this done. I got to get this hole dug. And he actually held off as long as he could. I mean, we're talking, talking about building a temple in 84 to 2008, right? And he actually held off. I think from what I've seen, my own eyes, is I think he held off until he realized that he was going to die if he didn't. You know what I'm saying? He had to do what he could do. His life was out. It was the end.
Right.
So he just kind of threw caution to the wind and started digging out the hole, and it was kind of a bad time because we were really trying to reconnect with the Alwood group and get authority, right? And some of us had realized that was important. I remember I asked Grandpa about authority because and he said the Lord will send us what we need. That was just like you said, that was definitely his attitude about everything. He said the Lord will send us what we need.
That is so admirable, because when you have to go about, I've always said the hardest decisions in this sort of scenario is where you're not necessarily mad at anybody, but you feel like the Lord's telling you something different than what your group is doing. And so to continue to have the intestinal fortitude to just keep at it, I think just speaks volumes to your grandfather's personality as well as his faith. It's super cool. It's a great story.
Yeah. It's interesting because shortly after he said that, he was digging on the hole. Shortly after that, a man by the name of Robert Lefevre came by, and he was actually going up. He was going up Independence, right? He had felt called to Missouri, and that's one thing I want to say. All these names that I've shared, they have their own story. They really do, and their own testimony. That's why I could never share it,
Sure.
and I wouldn't want to. But they all have their own story of the Lord bringing them here.
Sure.
Anyways, if I can gather my thoughts back in.
So you left off with Robert Lefevre coming out.
So yeah, Robert Lefevre came out, and he said this is his story. He's like, he knew Grandpa from back in their younger days, and he said I was just gonna pop the clutch and say hi, but he visited with Grandpa, and then he got really interested in the temple that Grandpa was doing. Right, Grandpa was digging out the hole, and he had fullness of priesthood, right?
Right.
And so he was ordained by Ted Jessup, who was ordained by Joe Thompson, who was ordained by Joseph Musser. So right. That's kind of that's the fullness line that we have, which ultimately, man, it's hard to cover all the different lines without getting sidetracked, but I'll do the best I can.
You're doing great.
And if I get boring, Dave, please just bring me back on track if I get off on a tangent.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great.
Okay. Well, anyways, so Robert Lefevre came out, and he was really interested in the temple, and he started doing some temple classes, and right off, I was not sure about Robert. Okay, anyways, yeah, so Robert Lefevre came out, and so I should share this with my wife, because this is kind of interesting. When I married her, I had to promise her, because her family was so against my grandpa. They had a lot. I don't know. Anyways, he had a reputation of being deceived, I guess. So this was really hard for them. For her marrying me was really hard. Interesting. Some of her families kind of disowned her for that. Shortly they repented fastly, but anyway, when I married her, she made me promise that I would not help on the temple. So I got married in 2004. So she made me promise that I wouldn't help on the temple unless God told me, right? And I felt like that was a pretty safe promise, because I didn't want to help on the temple unless God told me. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So I felt like it was something I could do. So I was just like, hey, yeah. So she wasn't going to marry me unless I could promise her that I wasn't just following Steve, right? Following my grandpa, because that's what we're being accused of, because everybody knew, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Anyways. So when Robert came out, this is kind of her story, but I do think it's interesting. He gave a temple prep class, and Robert is not a good speaker, if anybody that knows him, and a lot of times anyways, I won't go there, but he gave this talk, and afterwards my wife's heart was just burning. It was just burning inside her. And she pretty much got a testimony right there
that temple work was something she was supposed to be involved in. Like, I remember after the meeting, she went out and she was just crying. And she's just like, my heart is, she said, my bosam's burning, right? I guess the burning of the bosom, that's pretty much exactly how she described it.
Right.
And the time frames on these are going to be a little scrambled up, but anyways, Robert came out, and I didn't like him. I viewed him as kind of a threat. So right out of the bat, he started sitting, and Grandpa and him and a few of the older guys at the front of the meetings, tradition style, right? And kind of the leadership.
Right.
And everybody that had kind of come from Missouri had been burnt so bad from, priestcraft, so to speak.
Right.
That, these little things were pretty touchy, right?
Right.
So Robert got a lot of pushback because he was pretty much just trying to structure things exactly like the group, right? The groups he came from. You got the guys in charge, and then anyways, he had the fullness of priesthood. So I was definitely one of the ones that gave a lot of pushback on that. But right around this time, Dave Watson and Harry Bonnell actually come out to Missouri. So let me back up just a little bit.
Okay.
Grandpa was up there working on the temple. It was after he had a stroke, because I remember he said that when he was loading the dump truck, he said there were two dump trucks, and he had to decide which one was the real dump truck and which one was not the dump truck. So this Grandpa went from being a strong older man to having a stroke, and he was just like that. He was a feeble old man. It was insane. So that's how it hit him. He had a stroke, and then from then on, he was really feeble. But he had been working up their funds for months. Well, finally, me and a few of my brothers, about four of my brothers, had a roofing company, and we just decided to take a week off work, and all of us went up and helped him finish clearing out the basement, basically, of the rock.
Right.
And because he was really feeble, and obviously you get five young men up there, and you can make a lot of things happen way faster. But even when we got up there, that's kind of what I thought. And when we got up there, I couldn't believe. So my older brother Flint took over the track hoe, and as we measured the footings, because he had a measurement that they had felt like they had got revelation on how big the temple was supposed to be, right?
Right.
So it wasn't quite big enough, so we had to break out a little more rock. And so my older brother Flint got on the track hoe to break out just a couple more feet. And he said afterwards, like, I can't believe Grandpa, seeing doubles, did all that by himself. It was just, the rock was so hard. But we ended up clearing that rock out. And shortly when we started doing this, it was announced, basically, I don't know, somebody invited Harry and Dave Watson, I guess, to come out. I mean, Harry's dead now. He passed on, and Dave, I guess, is in charge now. And to the AEB. You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening, man.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
Anyways, so they came out, and it's really a beautiful experience. We had a priesthood meeting, and Robert kind of got up and said some things, and they kind of just shut him down, and then he just went home,
Right.
And so there's kind of like, a little bit of a pissing match, I guess you could say, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But Robert was humble about it. He just, said, all right, and he went home. And Dave Watson and Harry Bonnell basically said some blessings over the ranch. We had a meeting in the afternoon outside on a pavilion. And basically they invited my grandpa and Daryl to come out, and we could do a reconciliation, is what they called it, a reconciliation. And, we could reconnect to the group, and, I'm saying we could, be back united, I should back up a little bit, because this is important. I'll say I'm missing some stuff. Right around 2005, the group kind of, and this went everywhere, but they pretty much said everybody needs to come to Salt Lake, right?
Oh.
And so quite a few people that had tied that tie, they actually moved. So about 4 or 5 families moved, and they're still out there, right? Moved out because they were asked to. And so that happened around 2006. So we already people had moved out, and that was kind of the standing policy that the AU had, right? If you want to join us, just move out. But they had a branch here, but when everybody left, it really was kind of small. And so when Harry and Dave came out in 2009, that was kind of exciting because they kind of came out and they kind of were like, you guys can stay, right? Like, we're going to do a reconciliation. You guys can stay in Missouri, you know. And so they invited my grandpa and Daryl to come out and do a reconciliation. So we all went out there. A bunch of us went out for the conference. And, you know, my dad was there. A bunch of families were there. We went in. Lemoyne Jensen was the guy at the time, right?
Right.
And well, afterwards we found out that I guess Lemoyne Jensen had an anniversary with his wife or something that he was late for. So it's kind of just like, okay, you know, all right, if you guys will stop Saturday Sabbath, stop working on the temple, and stop doing the sacrament with anybody that ain't baptized by us, then we'll consider it a reconciliation, right?
Right.
And we voted on it. Several people didn't vote. I actually voted, yeah, let's do it, right? My grandpa and Daryl voted. It's kind of one of those things where it's just like, this is what we're doing, right? Anyways. So they raised their hand, yeah, okay, we'll do that. So they came back, and this is kind of when I feel like that some of the people we're working with, this kind of pushed them. So now there's the Nelson group, right, out here.
Okay, so the Nielsen Nailers were there during this time?
No, not exactly, right? I think this is kind of what pushed those who were affiliated or kind of came out of that branch, you know, as we tried to tie to the Allard group, it kind of pushed them to tie to their, you know, where they came from.
Oh, okay. All right.
So they started kind of looking that way. And so then, you know, and obviously they'd have to tell their own story. But this is how it kind of played out the way I remember it. Is that kind of was a catalyst in pushing them. So, you know, to tie back, because in a lot of ways I kind of feel like, well, we kind of abandoned them, right? Mm-hmm. Because the actual, we did have the Saturday Sabbath, and then we did have the kind of the AUB on Sunday. Well, then all the Saturday Sabbath people pretty much said, okay, well, we'll meet on Sunday, right? And then that left all the other people that come from the Crick and the other families like, okay, well, now what are we going to do, right? So I think that's kind of what initially started the ball rolling to create a Nelson Naylor branch out here, right?
Okay.
Definitely had a part to play in it. I'll put it that way. I don't know how big of a part, but it was definitely a part.
Sure.
But anyway, so they said they would do this. When we got back, this actually it was hard for everybody. For one, because we're all friends and family here, and then we pretty much said, okay, we will no longer partake of the sacrament with each other, right? So that it was kind of a brutal tear, right? Trying to remain true to that. It just didn't feel right, to be right honest. It became obvious real clear, I think, to most of us on this side that this wasn't right. Like, this ain't gonna work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember that on Sunday they did sacrament, and during the sacrament, Grandpa stayed kneeling through the whole thing, and then he just pretty much said afterwards, he says, I feel like I've signed a manifesto with the devil, is what he said.
Whoa.
And he said, I have to break this. I can't remain true to what I said I'd do, which was really hard on him. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
To kind of kind of break your word like that. Basically, just, I mean, he called him, says, I can't do it, guys. I'm gonna have to recant on that, or whatever
Right.
you want to call it. And so that was a lot of, that pretty much put a cut. I guess that was the beginning of the end with the Our Group for me, for good, right? Because I
Right.
had worked hard. I had actually went through, we went still, I did some work for the dead. And, I have nothing good to say. All the men I interacted with there were great men. I have nothing good to say about Dave Watson. I love Terry Bonnell. He actually really kind of, I don't know, we connected, especially with my mom's family. We stayed at his house. Every time I went out there, we'd stay at his house. He was kind of a hard ass, for lack of better words. But but he was still an awesome guy. He was very genuine.
Right.
And then Dave Watson, just awesome heart, very spiritual, very awesome guy. In fact, I've never been so happy than when I figured out he's the guy in charge. I think that's beyond awesome out there.
Nice.
Because one of the things that kind of like started pulling me away, was I got caught in the crossfire with what Grandpa and them did, right? It was kind of like, okay, chopped off, right? So
Right.
now it's back to anybody that wants to be part of the AB, they need to move out. Was pretty much the mandate, was back up. Then, if you want to be a part of us, you need to move out. And around this time, I had been doing a lot of pondering on, like, why have so many fundamentalist groups gone bad, like gone really horrible bad. I'm talking like Warren Jeffs and Ervil LeBaron, right?
Yeah.
And so I was reading a lot about these guys, right? Like, what was the principles that kind of trying to identify,
Sure.
And one thing I noticed with Ervil is, like, one thing he did was he took control of who could marry who. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if
Right.
you if you wanted to marry a girl, you had to get permission from him. So that obviously makes you, like everybody wants to get married. That's going to make you kiss up the guy who has the power to, let you get married, right?
Right.
And so the last conference I actually went to at AUB, it was said over the pulpit. One thing they were pushing it, like several talks. They were pushing that if you want to court a girl, you talk to the head of the priesthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what you're supposed to do. And to me, I was just like, I don't like this at all. Now, the reason I throw this in, because to Dave's credit, that was kind of the first thing he did, was he's just like, okay, if you want to get to know a girl, go talk to the, the bishop, her parents and the local bishop, right? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Which is spreading the power out, makes me feel so much better. I don't like to see power concentrated like that, because it's too easy to start manipulating people.
Sure.
So anyway, there's a lot of things that stacked up to me that just ended up pulling me away. Well, at this time, I think Robert had kind of realized, because we're so sensitive to priestcraft. I don't know. Not saying that he was a priest, wanted to do priestcraft, but we're just like, anybody in charge, or the one man, like, is almost a curse word to most of us here, was anyways. And so I think he kind of gave up and moved. He moved up north, up by Adam onto Ammon.
Okay.
And started doing some stuff up there. And at this point, I kind of, I don't know, I knew that my family was going to be going up to him to receive ordinance work, right? I just knew that my siblings were. I knew that was their only option. And so I decided to go up and just investigate, because I had been through the endowment, and I kind of felt like I knew, and knew kind of what, how it was supposed to be, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Right.
So I just kind of wanted to go scout it out, in all honesty. And so I went up and visited with Robert, and then I did some work from the dead, and there's a particular spirit in doing temple work.
Yep.
And I was actually quite shocked. I was like, oh my heck, that spirit's here, right? The same spirit.
Right.
And so that was kind of like, I guess is what I was wondering is, can I encourage my family to go this direction? Can I be like, hey, yeah, this is good. And so I had that experience, and it was kind of like an answer to my prayer. Yeah, what's going on here is good. And so I actually continue to go up. I try to go up once every couple of months. It's about a 3-hour drive from where I live here. And had some really beautiful experiences up there. I share one experience. Well, I have two things to share.
Okay.
And one thing I found interesting is it got so predictable that without fail, when we would go up to do temple work, something would come up, and me and my wife would start fighting over something, right? Mm-hmm. And we literally had a place about 5 minutes by a river, 5 minutes before we get to the place where we'd pull off, and we'd have to, because you have to make right. You can't go temple work, while you're all upset at each other.
Sure. And
it was crazy to me how we would get in the car, no feelings, everything was good, we're excited, and then something would come up, and we'd be, fighting for 3 hours. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I get it.
And it's like we started to recognize, we joke about it, right? Like, hey, if it's almost like we'd be like, let's not even say we're going up there, because, let's just sneak up there, because when we say it feels like we get sabotaged every time. So we started noticing that pattern, and it was crazy predictable how it was. But one particular time, after I had done ordnance work, as I was driving home, I stopped to get gas, and I just had an overwhelming amount of love for God's children, right? Like, my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest.
Wow.
And I went in to get gas, and there was a Harley rider in there, and he had his Harley attire on and a beard and tattoos. And I literally wanted to just hug him and tell him, you are a beautiful, beautiful person. It was weird. I had to restrain myself from just wanting to pour that on him.
Right.
And that has been a big mark to me to what the Spirit of God is.
Right.
And how often I don't have it.
Right. No, I get it.
You still there?
Yep, I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay. Anyways, and so I had quite a few beautiful experiences. Anyway, about, like I says, I may be jumping back and forth in time.
That's okay.
But it was probably around 2000, and it would have been from 2012 to 2014, right in there. So Camille had her experience about the temple, right?
Right.
And then she also was told to be a part of a great work. And then she was like dragging me, right? Like, I'm just like, I don't know, like trying to muster up faith. And she's just like, let's do it, right? So I've always found that hilarious that, she made me promise that I wouldn't help on the temple, and then she had to sit there and kick me in the butt.
Right, right.
Let's do it, So that's always been a kind of a big testimony. But they're just, man, like I says, they're still like, to say temple, going back to that, was kind of like, it would get awkward. There's just a few people that were even interested. And at this time, I felt like that. So my wife, I guess I should say this. My wife is really gifted at drawing up house plans. So when our house burned down, so she built it, and I was shocked. She just and she loved to draw plans. Like, it was kind of her passion, right? It made her happy to draw 10 house plans.
Really?
And so I started feeling like that, well, we need some plans for this temple, right? Because I started feeling like, well, to get energy, like maybe to get some excitement around getting this, maybe if we could present like something people could see, like, hey, this is what we want to build, right? Like if you could see it, maybe it'd help people, like, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let me stop.
So,
Seth, let me stop you right there, because I got a question. So how long did this open hole that your grandfather dug for the footings, how long did that just stay open?
Well, we dug the hole and we poured the footings in 2010. So the end of 2009, 2010. And then we didn't actually start anything different until the winter of 2019. So however long that is.
About 9 years. So it just sat vacant for 9 years.
Yeah, long enough that there were some pretty big trees growing in there. I know that.
Okay.
Because we had to pull those trees out.
10-4.
Anyways, but I kept waiting for someone to do something, right?
Right.
And nobody was doing anything. And I have to tell this because it's the only way. And I say the only reason I played the drums is because I was the only one that would play the drums, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And as a kid, we had you know, as teenagers, we kind of started up a little band, me and my three brothers. And my younger brother he paid like $700 and bought a drum set. And I played guitar. I wanted to play guitar. I loved playing guitar. So two of us were playing guitar and he bought it. So he's like, I'll play the drums, right? Well, he bought a drum set, but he just didn't have any rhythm. So he just couldn't play the drums. And and I literally didn't want to play the drums, but it literally hurt me that they were just that much money was just sitting there, not being used. So I was like, all right, I'll play them. So then I was the drummer, you know? So that's what happened.
That's awesome.
And so that's exactly how I felt with this. Like, okay. And so I was like, well, let's start drawing plans. I felt called in, and I should go back. I've always felt like, it's weird, just like this nagging on me that if I felt like that I was supposed to get this temple on track and going. I felt like it's weird to explain it, but you know, I was in my mom's belly when they first came out, and we kind of read where that temple was, you know, they said, I felt like I was excited about that work, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that I pretty much said I would make sure this gets done. That's honestly how I felt, you know. Literally, I guess that's probably the words. I pretty much felt like that in the pre-existence. I was like, I'll make sure this building gets done, and that's kind of what I felt like one of my jobs. And so I knew that if I every time I pictured myself on my deathbed, I knew that would just bother me that I didn't do that. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha. So you're feeling a calling coming from the Lord of let's get this going.
Yeah, pretty much. You know, you're kind of waiting for someone more qualified, right?
Right.
But it's just so. And then my wife is really good at drawing plans. So it's what we did is it's like, well, you know what? Let's start praying about it and let's start drawing plans, and we'll just present it to anybody that's interested and see what they think. And so she started drawing up plans, and I remember first thing I went to Grandpa and I asked him if he had any plans, if he, you know what I'm saying, and somebody had drawn some plans, one of his kids, and at least drawn what it looked like.
Right.
But they couldn't find any information, and he just said, God's just going to have to show someone else. It's pretty much what he said.
Gotcha.
So right off we started drawing plans, and right off realized, wow, for try to fit everything that we would want in this building, it's way too small.
Right.
You know, 60 by 40 turns out to be pretty small as a temple. And so the first plan we drew was just like, it was huge. And we added bigger than the actual basement, right?
Right.
And then we pretty much just said, hey, you know, anybody that's interested on the temple, come get with us, meet with us over at our house, and we'll pray about this and talk about this. So, you know, in about 5 or 6, 7 people would show up, you know?
Right. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by DeseretFlag.com. I've said this before and I really mean it. Mormonism isn't just a religion, it's a culture. As such, it has its own vernacular and practices, but also its own symbols. And those symbols become even more important and prominent when you look back into our history. Perhaps one of the most recognizable symbols of Mormonism is the Deseret flag. This is the flag that I use as cover art in this podcast. This was also used for a good chunk of time during the pioneer era in Utah. Now, today we have people who want to replace the existing Utah flag with some other progressive monstrosity. Well, I think it's damn past time that we start pushing back here a little bit in Utah. Our friends at Defending Utah are here to help you with that. Now, if you go to DeseretFlag.com, you can now purchase your own Deseret State flag. It's time here that we start making ourselves known and join the resistance against those who seek to rewrite our state's history. Go to DeseretFlag.com or check out the link in this episode's page show notes and get yours today. Can't get enough of the Mormon Renegade podcast? Well, good news. We're on Patreon, and there's 3 packages that you can choose from. The first one, the Slightly Rowdy package, allows you to hear the podcast without all those pesky commercials getting in the way. For those who want a slightly more in-depth experience, there's the Stirring It Up package, where you can hear ad-free audio, ad-free video, and transcripts. Finally, for those who want to go full Renegade, that package is available too, where you can get everything in the previous 2 packages, plus an extra show where myself and Ben Winfield break down the news of the day from a very Mormon point of view. You will also get exclusive access to Renegade Chat, and on there you'll be able to talk to others about the show or whatever topics are on your mind. Go to Patreon today and get your exclusive content.
But we really ironed a lot of that out, just with feedback, and we got it down to where everybody was pretty happy, and through a lot of prayer and fasting, and basically, just trying to walk forward in faith until God showed you. You know what I'm saying? It was I guess it was a trial and error, right? So it's how it would work is a lot of times is, Camille would draw something and I would come and I'd say, that's just not right, right? I didn't know exactly what was wrong, but that was just not right. And she'd be like, yeah, that doesn't feel right to me. So we'd work on it and then we'd present it and then get feedback, right? And then we'd go back and try to incorporate that in.
Gotcha.
Well, we pretty much got it. Everybody felt like, Grandpa and them felt inspired of the size, so we need to fit whatever we need to fit in just the original footprint, so to speak. So we tried to make it all work there. And I have to tell this. I have to tell this part because it's quite funny. Around this time, Robert came down and he said, I heard you guys are back working on the temple, right? He's like, this time, don't let anyone stop you. Because before the AV kind of shut it down, right? Right. With the reconciliation, they're like, so, and it just kind of stalled out for, what'd you say, whatever that was,
About 9 years, yeah.
But he said, this time, don't let anybody stop you. And we got it drawn out on paper, but obviously me or my wife doesn't know how to detail or engineer anything,
Right.
And
load-bearing walls, that sort of thing.
Exactly, and then just get it on a computer where it's actually workable, not on a squared paper.
Right.
But we had a few guys that could do that. Anyway, I talked to Tom Zitting, and he was pretty adamant that Hiram Zitting was the guy. So Hiram said, long story short, basically, yeah, he can work on that. So we started meeting with Hiram, and like I says, this was a slow process. This is what I find. I think this is important to the testimony of the building, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is it was just slow going. For one, it's hard to work on. You want to put yourself in a space, if you're going to work on the temple, that you feel like you're worthy, right? Or you're at least you've somewhat. It's not just an everyday thing that you're just like, here, you don't treat it like it's just an everyday job. It's something that you want to have a good spirit about, right?
Right.
And that played in a lot of how slow things went. Working on it when you felt like you had the right spirit to work on it. And I ended up just telling Hiram that whenever he wanted to work on it, just call us. I pretty much told, me and Camille pretty much made it our top priority. So whenever it was good for him, we'll drop everything and we'll just go and work with you on the computer. And so we started working with Hiram for quite a few years, trying to meet once a month, but sometimes it was more like once every 3 months or whatever. It's just hard to get together, and it was really a snail's pace.
Right.
Man, this story is super long, Dave. How long do we want to go?
It's your call, dude. I'm good.
So, basically, we're working on the plans. There's just not any traction. We can't get any traction, but we're really trying, right?
Right.
And right, I'm gonna jump now to um to 2019, I guess. Because this is a part of this story, and
Okay.
basically, some of my sisters and friends, their friends, decided to go. I guess, for lack of a better word, they really were looking for something. Felt like something was missing. So they decided to go to like a Christian, what they call it, like a workshop of some kind, right? It's like a hands-on, like um faith workshop, uh sign type thing, right? So they went to this Christian workshop. Man, I don't know if that's the right word, but uh and it so happens that a few of them got baptized. They were tongues was wild at this place, right? And
Okay.
they start speaking in tongues, and so they come back, super excited about, the gifts of the Spirit, I guess. And obviously, there's, I don't know, maybe you don't have it. If you're a Mormon, born and raised where I was, like a million red flags are going off, right?
No,
Like,
that would make red flags go off for me too, Seth. I've been a Mormon of one form or another now for 28 years. And yeah, at this point
okay.
it's ingrained. So yeah, that would send up some red flags too.
Anyway, so I was I was actually quite frustrated, and just at real arm's length of this thing.
Right.
Um, Man, I'm trying to figure out how to shorten this and just stick to the main root of the story that maybe would be interesting or not interesting. Basically, um, long story short, my brother came and talked to me and said, "Hey, the bottom line is we met with them, and the spirit's really strong." And he's just like, I started speaking in tongues. I was just like, I had enough trust in him, and he was like, I'm kind of a guy that will attack something and shut it down if I feel like it's dangerous, right?
Right.
And he came and come talk to me just like, I feel like you need to investigate this. Like, don't just attack it because we're all whatever. And um so we were actually doing a prayer meeting at this point. A lot of people at this point had actually got their endowment from up north from Robert
Okay.
basically. And we had a monthly prayer meeting that we do, prayer circle. Well, at this prayer circle, we started those individuals there that went to this Christian thing, right? We started praying, um, and and tongues broke out in our prayer meeting, right?
Right.
And um, I decided, what the heck? I'll be right honest. I was looking at one of my brothers, and I could see the joy he was feeling, and it was actually irritating me that I couldn't partake of it, right? And so I'm like, what do I need to do to feel that joy that I can see he's feeling, right? I could see it on his countenance. Great joy. Um, and so, you know, uh people started kind of splitting off into different little circles and just praying, right?
Right.
And um I had one of my good friends that I was working with. Um, it was the wife to the brother that came and talked to me. Okay, so this was my brother, and he actually started praying with me, and he prayed a lot of beautiful prophetic prayers. They're quite beautiful. And he was holding his arms up to the square, and he was trying to get me to hold them up to the square, and I couldn't do it. I kept getting tired, right? And literally for probably a solid hour, as he was praying, and I'm just trying to get my mind around some things. but I'm really trying to let go. I feel like I have been fasting to try to get myself in a humble place.
Right.
And I felt like usually when I fast I could feel the spirit, but I just felt strong, like physically, like there was a block there. And um at some point throughout the time, this brother's wife came over and she started praying with me, and then she started saying a
Seth,
repetitive prayer. And
Seth, you're sounding like you're kind of far away from your phone.
um
There you
sorry, is
go.
that better?
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah. Anyways, she started praying in tongues, a repetitive message, and it was this is what she's saying: Tovia ase akumu oyaha. Tovia ase akumu oyaha. And she kept saying, "This is for you, Seth. This is for you." And I am a serious skeptical person, right? Like, um, and she kept saying, "You say it," and I couldn't pronounce it right. And she's just like, "Ah, that's not right. That's not right." And she was, and so I was like, you know what? Let's write it down. So I was just, you know, I asked one of my mothers that were there if she would write it down. And this is the truth. This is how it happened. As she was writing down, the thought popped in my head. You know what? I've had words come to me in dreams, and if you don't know how to spell them, then it doesn't do you any good, right? Especially if it's a different language.
Sure.
So, right when I'm thinking this, this lady basically says Tuvia, Tuvia, just spells it out. That was the only word she spelled. That was all I cared about. This time my cup was full, right? So to speak, kind of. I guess so much happened, I guess, that night, and we'll keep going because it is kind of interesting. But right then I took that. I ripped that. I didn't care about anything else. I only needed that one word, and I was just like, we'll see about this. Like, I'll prove this, right? Like, I'll see what's going on here. Is this jumbo mumbo, or is this something important, right? This is what I was thinking at the time. So I put it in my bag. Was the night went on, everybody, the meeting closed, and I was still feeling like I was feeling blocked from the spirit, right?
Okay.
And basically, as I was getting ready to leave, was pretty much just told to stay. So I stayed, my wife stayed, my brother and his wife stayed, and one of my close friends just stayed. And as we started, as I just felt like I was blocked, right? So it was kind of like they were staying for me because I just wanted to stay and pray. Like, why am I feeling so blocked? Well, it turns out that I had struggled with something in my life, and I never felt like I could get over it. I just felt like I kept tripping on it. Well, I felt like that I needed to actually come clean and basically say, hey, look, you know what I'm saying? I've had this problem. I just haven't been able to overcome it. It's like one of those things where it's like, you think you're gonna get it, and you know, but I didn't have the courage to say it. I didn't, and my brother's wife, her name's Jessica. I guess I could just say her name. Jessica basically just said, hey, look, yeah, she pretty much called me out on it. She pretty much just said, she said, this bars you from the spirit, and I was like, wow, at that point. And so I just confessed, and they basically, everyone there just loved me. And at that moment, so this was in the middle of winter. It was really cold. That's all I do know. It was really cold, and it was about 1 a.m. There was actually just a little bit of snow on the ground. But immediately when I confessed, it's like I wanted rebaptized. I desired it with my whole heart. And this is what I like, because I was born in the gospel, and I was baptized when I was 8 or 9, right? And it's just even to this day, that feels like my conversion, right?
Sure.
Even though I grew up in the gospel, it was a conversion for me, of a very powerful conversion for me, I guess. But I actually, for the first time, longed for baptism, and I understood why. Some of the early stories in the Mormon Church, why that they chopped holes in the ice, right, to be baptized. All those stories.
Right. Yeah.
And so as a kid, when I'd read those stories, it's like, good grief, just wait for spring, right, or whatever. Like, you guys are so silly.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of extreme lunatics are you, right?
Right.
And so I kind of feel like that's kind of the story of my life. That's kind of, anyways, we'll get there. So basically, I want to be baptized, and I kind of said, I want to be rebaptized, like, right now, like, it needs to be done immediately. And my brother said, well, there's a bathtub, we could do it in that, or there's a pond close by, and I was just like, I can't get rebaptized in a bathtub. Like, that just don't feel right. And so we made our way down to the pond, and it's pitch black. It's in the middle, it's like 1 a.m. And when we went in, it was so cold that it was hard to keep your wits about you. We couldn't figure out how you're supposed to hold your hands. You know what I'm saying? And
right.
And I kind of know we finally got that figured out. And I kind of know what my brother was thinking. He was thinking, well, there's no witnesses, so I need to take him down deep, and I need to take him down long, right? And
or that's a story he's going to tell just to hold you down.
Well, I kind of make the joke, and if you, I'm starting to stutter now. Wow. An old sinner, young people, I put it this way: at 8 years old, you should be baptized in a font with warm water. At 30 years old, you should be baptized in the middle of the night in ice cold water. That's kind of my testimony, I guess. But he took me down.
Not to take away from your story, but I once had a good friend who told me that when he was on his mission in the LDS church, there was one guy who, when he got baptized, put like 2 bath bombs in his pocket, and then it started foaming, and like everyone ran out screaming. So anyway, sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, yeah, he took me down, and I felt like I went into the depths of hell. I'll be honest how it felt. It was actually a powerful experience. I went down, it was so cold, and it was so dark. It was darker underwater because there's a little bit of a moon. There's a sliver of a moon, but it went so dark when I underwater, and I felt like he just took me down, down, down. And like it says, we're pretty particular on making sure, no part sticks out of the water. And then he held me there for a second, and then he brought me back up. And when I came out of that water, I literally felt like that my old self had stayed in the grave, right? I came up a new man, a clean new man, for the first time in my life, because I don't really remember ever feeling that way, as my first baptism. I don't remember it. And I have been rebaptized before, but just never was that powerful.
Well, I think you set a good example there, Seth, in the sense that you had something that, as you put it, kept tripping you up, right? And we all have those, right? Anyone who says they don't have those, I'm like, why are you still here, bro? Because if you don't have those, you would have either been translated or taken. And so I think you're setting a good example of how rebaptism should go. You should have that feeling. And if you don't have that feeling, I'm not saying you're doing it wrong, but maybe dig a little deeper within yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's exactly kind of what had came through from this Christian workshop, right? Was basically the deep confession, the deep making things right, and then baptism. So that was kind of what was going around, and that was kind of what was being, and even I was surprised. So after I kind of just went for it, then in the DNC, I couldn't believe everywhere it was confess your sins and forsake them and be baptized. Because I kind of thought, confessing was something that the Catholic Church did. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But one thing that I always had this thing, right, that I was just like, confess your sins. And then it was always, to God, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, oh, thank goodness that nobody has to know, right? Nobody has to know these things about me. But I found that actually the devil was using that against me. And basically afterwards, after I confessed, and was rebaptized, the first thing he tried to do is he tried to bring it up, and he's just like, you're guilty of this. And I was just like, I know, they know, I told them, everybody knows now, right? And then then he was just gone. Like,
right.
Like he couldn't use that as leverage. And then it helped me just let it go too. It was weird. It had no power over me anymore. It's like I was free from it. It's weird. So I have a huge testimony in the power of confession. I do think that it needs to be kept in the context of, as Joseph says, don't do things that will make you lose confidence in one another. So it needs to be to a brother that's trusted, right? Because it will be used against you. The devil will use it against you. And that's why I choose not to say it on here, because it's more of an open forum, and I don't know who this goes to,
Yeah, no.
And so when you confess, it needs to be to a brother that's trusted and that's going to have your back. And then when the devil tries to use it against you, it just doesn't work, because you're like, yeah, all my friends know, right? My closest brothers already know.
Right.
So this started kind of a deep repentance. And this may sound strange maybe to other people, but when you're born and raised a fundamentalist, and this is kind of, so then we start getting a lot of attacks, right? And obviously there's red flags, right? But then there's also legitimate attacks kind of from this Christian perspective that are hitting me. And a lot of them were off base, and it bothered me from the beginning. A lot of them were false accusations, but then a lot of them were true. They were hitting me right on heart, and I couldn't ignore them. I was just like, no, that's actually, it's actually true. I'm actually guilty of that. And that was one of the things, is I feel like that growing up in the fullness of the gospel, my parents were great parents, and of course they teach you baptism, right? Of course they teach you repentance. But it's weird how we're so focused on the fullness of the gospel as a grown-up fundamentalist that sometimes, even though you think or even though I thought I understood, I didn't really understood how to truly repent, truly confess, and then truly know that God had forgiven you of your sins, right?
Yeah. No,
and so it was kind of like this. It was powerful. Like there's definitely a spiritual movement. We were feeling called to repentance big time, and so it was kind of like we were meeting every other night, just someone to be like, hey, let's have a meeting, and boom, you'd show up and there'd be 20 guys there, right? 20 people. It's kind of like this tight little circle of your closest friends, and we're just getting together and sharing our experiences, and basically encouraging one another, and it was always in the tone of trying to understand repentance better, truly repenting and being forgiven. And it's interesting because I will say this, I always laughed at the Christians when they would come to me, because I was actually the guy that would debate them for hours at Nauvoo, right? When you'd have the preacher on the corner, Mormonism's false,
Sure.
It's like, sure. I literally spent hours and hours, but it's funny. One question they'd always ask you, have you been saved? And I was like, look, I mean, obviously, of course, I've been saved. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
But now I can honestly say, when a Christian asks me, have you been saved? I can literally say to them, I was like, at 100%, brother. Like, I know I can relate on their level what they're saying, which I couldn't before. So I think that's quite interesting and valuable. To that, I've never experienced it. And even to this day.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was gonna say, because we're Mormons, right? And I don't want to lose sight of this because it's so important. Exaltation is often placed in front of salvation. And I get it, right? Because exaltation is where we're all aiming. But the first ordinances of the gospel have everything to do with salvation. It has everything to do with confession, repentance, and baptism. And sometimes I think because we know we've been tasked with loftier things, I think it's kind of within human nature to lose sight of the first things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it sounds like you rediscovered those first things again.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's hard because of course I was taught repentance, of course I was taught baptism, but there was definitely a lot more power to it. And and I told them at meetings, I was constantly sharing my concerns, right? And I told them, you know what, I'll go as far as I can, but when this thing takes a left turn, I can't go with you guys, right?
Sure.
Just that's what I told them right early on. But I've absolutely, like, Joseph Smith, my hero. So that's like his words. And I guess that's kind of how I kind of got this. This is one thing I got from my grandpa is, scriptures first, and then Joseph, and then beyond that, it was, it was all in question to me. That's me personally. That's how I was always raised. So it's really hard to talk to people that I realize, like I was talking to a family member, and I said, okay, if scripture says one thing and the journal of discourses says another thing that contradicts it, which one do you take? And he was just like, oh, hands down, journal of discourses. I was like, oh, wow. It's weird to learn that. And so at that point, you're like, well, of course we can't ever come to anything right. But I love what Joseph Smith taught on, basically, we accept truth no matter where it comes from. And
right.
If you don't, you won't come out true Mormon, right? So to me, it's that idea that has always shaped my life. And so I always say I'm never afraid to investigate or try anything once, right? And really feel it out.
Right.
And so if it's true, it's true. But I told him, I'm saying, as soon as this thing proves to be untrue to me, I'm saying, as soon as this boat takes a turn is how I've worked with it, then, I'm jumping on, I just want you guys to know. Because in the mix of this, there's a lot of red flags too, right? And to me, anyways, but to carry on,
you're kind
basically,
of there, you're back.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
To carry on, this is obviously causing a huge stir in the community, right? And for good reason, right? I don't blame anybody. This is because my family's. I have sisters who are married on the other side. Anyways, and I told them, look, bottom line is, if I was over there, I'd be doing what they're doing, right? So it's up to us to prove whether to take the good, right, and prove that it's worth something or not, I guess. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting on a side note. No, so basically, good. we all met together. It was winter 2019, right before the new year. We were having a lot of meetings, or we had quite a few meetings. And at that meeting, the spirit was so strong, and we felt like that we were so close to parting the veil. It's almost like you could feel the veil over your head. That's what it felt like to me. Like I could almost feel the veil over my head. And basically, someone started speaking in tongues, and then someone started interpreting. So that's kind of how this tongues was working. That's how the tongues was manifest. That's we always had someone would say something, and then different people would interpret. You know what I'm saying? It just depended on who heard it, right? And so in this meeting, this came through tongues. And so obviously this was all going around this had all been going around the community. You can't take tongues for doctrine, on and on and on. But this is how it went down in this particular meeting, is basically through tongues. There's a lot of things that happened, very powerful spirit there, but through tongues, basically, it was, we were asking God, what do we need to do to come into your presence to break this veil? We feel like we're so close. And God said, why would I come to you in this living room when it's only because slothfulness and lack of faith that you haven't built a house for me? And he said, if one of you were to quit your job and work on the temple full time and his family be supported from the tithing, then it would be money well spent. And then one of the men there because I thought it was interesting because several of us felt the call, like, oh man, I need to quit my job, right, and go full time on the temple.
Right.
Several people felt that call. Well, one of the brothers there says, what if more than one of us? And then it was said, if all of you quit your jobs, I would take care of you, and that was, that actually scared me. A lot of things scared me because I knew my faith was there, right? Like, I can't just quit my job, right? And I almost felt like he's being called, hey, quit your job and work for me, right? And afterwards it said, you're not strong enough to do this, but you need to start working towards this, right? You need to start working towards working for me, I guess, basically. Anyway, that meeting, 2019 meeting, was what started the energy. And so through this whole time, we had still been working with Hiram with the plans, right? So we had the plans done to the attic. We were to the attic. And so there was about 20 men there. A couple of them quit their jobs cold turkey, and just started working every day up there, right? And getting on this. And basically, so we started physical construction, and real fast, the physical building caught up to the computer plans, if that makes sense. Even with what we had it done almost. So I find all this interesting, like God placed everything in place, right?
Right.
And I shortly after this meeting I'm talking about, that they started working on it.
Yeah.
One of my brother-in-laws came out, and him and my brother and another friend went up to the temple hall and started praying. And they received, not through tongues, but through just revelation. They were told basement to steeple in 2 years. And, we talked a lot about that. For me, I always thought, if we can set the steeple and have the building dried in 2 years, right, we've made that. A lot of people, we're just like, no, we have to have it finished in 2 years. So, not that it matters, but we kind of had that. But it is quite a miracle. I can't even tell you how many, like, God could have shut this project down so many times at every turn. And yet he just keeps opening things up and opening things up and opening things up. And through a miracle, we actually were able to set the steeple in the fall of the 2-year mark.
Okay. Real quick, can I just make a couple of observations?
Yeah.
So first, I can see, kind of, if I might be so bold, you talk about this extreme repentance process that happens out there. And I don't mean extreme in the terms of, like, hardcore evangelical, revivalist, shouting from the rooftops kind of stuff. But there's a general feeling moving through where the Lord is prompting you guys to repent, to get right, to rebaptize, to get yourselves right with God. And what I find very interesting is that as soon as you do that, then kind of the windows of heaven break forth here, right? And all these things start happening in the building process. So often we look at a temple and we think it's for the glory of the temple itself, right? And that's not the case. Sometimes I think, and this definitely harkens back to the early saints with Joseph and Brigham. Part of the reason the Lord commanded them to build a temple and not farm it out to somebody to do for them, like is done in the mother church today, was because that the Lord wanted a people humble enough that they would be able to build a temple so that he could communicate with them. And I think it's very interesting that pattern is repeated again here out there in Missouri. The next thing I want to say is that the fact you were able to go basement to steeple in 2 years is nothing short of miraculous. I've worked on an LDS temple about the size of yours back when I was a member of the LDS church. Now, the LDS Church today, it farms out all of its labor, right? To quote the pros. And you would be hard-pressed to get a temple for the LDS Church that finished in 2 years, even with hired help, even with all the church's resources. And you guys did it with essentially volunteer help and not near, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think you guys have the resources of the LDS Church as far as money, right?
No.
And so the fact that you could do that is nothing short of miraculous. It is nothing short of quite frankly, divine intervention. And I think that's something that should be accounted for here, because I think it shows certainly the hand of God there working amongst the folks there in Missouri.
Yeah, no, and I've also thought a lot about that too, is exactly what you said. I can't help to notice that we all, like, it was kind of a thing which, for good reason, freaked the community out, but we'd meet together, and then we were doing baptisms at night, right? Just a lot of baptisms. But it's like I almost feel like God was cleaning us, okay, now you're clean. Now you can work on my house, right? You're ready to work on my house.
Yep, exactly.
And it was one thing we've always used is, what Joe Smith says, God's not building a house, he's trying to build a people, right?
Exactly.
And then the other thing with the finances, that's, like, my brother's the bishop, and that's one of his testimonies is the finances don't make sense. And we've had quite a bit of contributions from people, right? But to be honest, the handful of people that have built this building, I don't even know how it's done. I literally don't. Like, it's just a handful of people that's built this building, and
right.
And it just doesn't make sense. It literally don't make sense. There, like I said, there's a lot of interest. There's been a lot. I don't want to cut people off, I guess, and so I hesitate to know how to say it, because obviously there has been help, but it's actually, on the other hand, been embarrassing how little help has been on this building. For the people even in this community, how little help has been building this building. Is quite interesting, and yet God just keeps opening up the windows of heaven. Kind of feel like it's like the story in the Bible of, no, you have too many men, cut them down more. No, you still got too many, cut them down more. So at least for ourselves, we can't deny that God is, maybe blessing this building, I guess, or opening up the way.
Right. Well, something else I want to point out here too that I find remarkable is that, as you've described the community out there, and as you've described how this came to be, there wasn't like the one central figure, or it even sounds like necessarily even a governing body that was overseeing this. This was just people coming together because they felt the call from the Lord and got it done, right?
Yeah. So, initially we had started the physical building of the building, and we were working on some of the details on the attic section, and some complications broke out. And that's when we decided to actually, we needed to form a council. So one of the brothers basically said, hey, look, we need a council. So we end up coming together in our priesthood body and voted in 12 men to oversee the building project, right? And so about halfway through the physical building of the building, we actually organized an official council. And that's been, man, so helpful, which meets every Sunday evening. We meet and basically talk, just what we need to do, and go over, continue, because we're still in the final pay. I mean, the things that have to be picked out and accounted for and, decided on just never end. It's just, right. I actually can't believe how many decisions that had to be made in building a building like this. I don't think anybody can comprehend. I mean, probably can, that's being exaggerated, but I couldn't comprehend how many decisions have to be made.
Sure.
And so that's pretty much those 12 men do. And then at the first of every month, anybody that wants from the community can come and sit in the meeting and, put in there if they've got any revelation or anything, put it in as a suggestion of, hey, this is what we got or whatever.
Okay.
Well, and then we do have.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say we are organized as a church. We have articles and covenants, and so we are somewhat organized. But yeah, I know that a lot of people have come here. For the most part, this community functions like Joe Smith says. I teach them correct principle, and they govern themselves.
Right.
We kind of have things in place, but they're not really used, to be honest, right? Everybody just kind of knows what they need to do, and it works because everybody just is good people, to be honest.
Yeah.
Great. So that's kind of how we function, and it takes people a long time to figure that out. They're always trying to figure out, well, how are you guys? Who's in charge? What's this? What's that? And at the end, we do have things in place, but it works very organically. So it's definitely a lot different than I think what people are used to seeing in a fundamentalist community.
Dude, when I was out there, I was super impressed, not just with the temple, and I'll get back to the temple here in a second, not just with the temple, but with the community at large, right? I was out there a couple different days, and I mean, you got a little store, a little cafe, businesses, homes. It's a school, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm revealing too much, Seth, let me know and I'll edit this out.
No,
I don't want to betray.
Yeah, you're good. Now we've already had a reporter report all of this, so
right?
It's out there for people to find.
10-4. And when I was there, you guys are really close, right? Because it was down to just painting the different rooms, correct?
Yeah. So the attic is still lacks some work, but the building's pretty much done we're down to one last room, the very last room. Other than that, we're just doing touch up in the paintings.
Gotcha. Do you guys know what year that'll be dedicated?
We don't know yet. We were if I was to be honest, I'm going to say next fall, around Feast of Tabernacles. A lot of people are hoping for, April 6th. We were hoping to have it done right now, and then we were going to take some time to meet in it and figure out how to govern it, right? Like, what do we need to do? Which we have since figured out a lot of that stuff, but we need to meet together and get some more stuff sorted out before we kind of, like open it, I guess, or dedicate it, I think.
Sure.
So I'm gonna say probably not till next fall, but we planned on trying to, if we know something sooner, we'd try to get the word out for anybody that wants to come to the dedication.
Right on.
But
can I throw out another observation at you?
Go for it.
I was sitting here and I was just doing the math. And if it's dedicated in 2024, which it sounds like it's kind of on track to being, right? From the time your grandfather first gets out there to the time when the temple's dedicated, that'll be exactly 40 years. Now, that is a pretty interesting number. How long did the children of Israel wander in the wilderness? 40 years.
40 years.
How long did it take to complete the Salt Lake Temple?
40 years.
That's
interesting.
I find it fascinating. All I'm saying is that once again, the Lord seems to be repeating a pattern.
Oh, another interesting thing is the day we poured the last oxen. Okay, so this is how this went down, Dave. We met in our temple council meeting, and we have to get a crane over there to set the steeple, right?
Right.
And we thought, well, that's kind of a big deal, right? So in my mind, I wanted to maybe push it to that Saturday. And basically, we talked about it, and everyone in there basically was just like, we're going to be ready Wednesday. Let's do it Wednesday. And I was like, all right, we're doing it Wednesday. So that Wednesday, after the fact, one of our good friends did just what you did. It happened that we poured the very last oxen on the font, which is in the basement, and we set the capstone on a Wednesday. And that was 2020. Oh my God, I'm bad with math. So that would have been exactly 2 years. So we started in 2020. So that was 2022. That was the fall of 2022. and it landed exactly on Feast of Trumps, which kind of blew my mind then.
Yeah.
So and I've made this observation, or we've talked about it, obviously, because like there's so much to tear down your faith when you're doing a project like this. The devil just hits you and hits you and hits you. And so we try to share. But one thing that I've borne my testimony is from that experience when we've talked about finishing this building. Whenever it's done, I promise you it'll be on God's timing, right? Because every time we try to plan something like I did, it's not as cool as when he does it. So we haven't really worried. We've just tried to put our shoulder to the wheel and trust that he will help us get it done when it needs to be done. So that is quite interesting. 40 years. I'll have to take your word for it because that's how bad I am at math. But I'm going to go home and punch those numbers in and see if you're right.
Yeah, no, I did the math on my calculator here because it caught my eye. So 1984 to 2024 is 40 years.
Well, I guess that's easy math, huh? Yeah. Wow. So, well, I'm there's not a bone in my body that thinks we're not going to be done by next Tabernacles. Unless God stops the work for his own purposes. That sure. For sure. I think that gives us plenty of cushion to get it done. And so that is quite cool.
Yeah. No, I was just sitting here as you were talking about it, and I was like, okay, thinking back to what it looked like when I was there, I was like, because I remember walking through there and I was like, okay, probably another 6 months to a year out before it's completed. Because I work construction, so I'm a surveyor, so I'm used to looking at projects complete and that sort of thing. And I'm like, yeah, probably a year away. And then as you were sitting here talking, and 84 was the first time that your grandfather got there with all of his friends, I was like, holy cow, that's like 40 years.
Yeah.
So
no, that's interesting because that is interesting.
So Seth, we've covered a lot here. Is there anything else you want to go over that you feel is important that maybe I didn't give you a chance to say or I glossed over?
Yeah, I should. Man, I got a couple of things I need to tie up, okay. And I want to take my time, but get through it as quickly as possible because it's I just want to represent people, I guess, the best I can.
Okay.
But I had mentioned that that when Robert had first come out, I gave him a lot of pushback, and me and him didn't necessarily get along real well at first.
Right.
I should circle back, and while he was still here, we actually became really good friends and built a really good relationship. We always kind of, I guess, had friction, and I can speak for, I know a lot of us here feel this way, that we feel real strong that God's trying to do something different. And that was everybody that came here. They came here in their heart to try to establish Zion, right? The place where, all those who don't want to lift up their sword against their neighbor must flee Zion. So it's kind of in our heart. It's definitely that idea. Maybe not that we're creating the literal center stake of Zion, but trying to be a stake of that and built on those principles. And I know that a lot of us have always felt that God's trying to do something a little different. And so there was always that kind of, I guess, kind of like what I said with just setting things up with, this guy's in charge. And it didn't work real good with Robert in that way in this community, because I guess trying to put it in a way that people would understand is, I feel like with us here, basically, man, for lack of a better words, it's like we've created a lot of idolatries, or we really easy fall into idolatry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really easy to have, this guy's in charge, that, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And
to kind of make man your God sometimes.
Exactly. It's not, and we almost do with everything. So,
right.
So in Isaiah, I believe he basically says that, only God will be exalted, right?
Right.
Nothing else. And it's weird. I've seen it in Mormon culture and maybe fundamentalist culture where, in so many ways, we're almost like the Jaredites or even Samuel, where we're just like, give us a king. Where in Zion, I know that basically Christ is the king, right? And it's too easy if you're not real careful to put a man there where it makes us lazy, I guess, because we don't have to, we don't have to exert ourselves. We can just go somewhere.
Well, yeah. And that goes back to what Joseph Smith said, right? He said the children of Israel really became darkened in their minds when he's like, okay, everybody, we're all going to come up here and we're all going to see the Lord, right? We're all going up the mountain. And they were like, I don't think so, Moses, you go. Right. And that was what Joseph Smith said was, they became darkened in their minds when they didn't desire to commune with God directly.
Right. And that's another thing in like section 101 where he says, the time will come when you won't say, do you know the Lord? For you'll all know the Lord.
Right.
From the least to the greatest. So that's kind of like the idea. And I think that God has, this is my own personal view and testimony things. I feel like God's worked really hard to try to keep us out of creating anything where you can just look and say, oh, that guy's in charge or that group's in charge. Because ultimately, if God ain't in charge here, right, then we've kind of failed, I guess. And so that was kind of what the friction was. But yet it's really hard to accomplish things too. That comes with its own set of challenges. So that's, I think when Robert ended up just seeing that wasn't working, he ended up moving up north, which actually worked really good because then he could just do what he needed to do. And then, we could go up and learn from him and receive from him. And then he could be in total control, right? Where we weren't having this conflict of kind of ideas.
Right.
I guess of how things should be governed. Anyway, so we that's kind of what, in other words, is what I'm trying to say is that was actually a really good thing. And I mentioned, that it was kind of funny because, about right after we started working on the temple plans, Robert came to me personally, he looked me in the eye and he says, I hear you guys are starting the temple. This time, don't let anyone stop you. Well, then, the time we actually, so that's when we were just working on the plans, the time we actually started the physical building, we'd been separated and he kind of had the idea that, well, we should all be going up there and building something up there. And, then he told me personally, you need to not build that temple. You need to come up here. So I found that quite kind of funny that he was the one who said, don't let anyone stop you. And then ended up being kind of like, hey, I think you guys need to come up here.
Right.
But I think he had a lot of mixed feelings on this building, to be honest, because he told different people different things. And he's always been engaged and, interested. But in the end, he ended up definitely kind of, and I'm trying to represent him correctly, I guess, because I don't want him roped into things that he doesn't want roped into, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No.
But I want to give him the honor that he deserves, I guess. So that's why I want to take some time on kind of that relationship. And the last time that me and my brother actually talked to him, and he just said, no, I can't tell you guys that you're not supposed to build that. And he said, I may have to repent for the things I've said to you. So he's always had mixed feelings, but in a lot of ways, we've had a really good relationship, but we've kind of been, I think, kind of a pain in his side too. So,
sure.
But anyways, that was.
Yeah. With that sort of thing, that's just human nature, I think, to some extent, right? If you're looking for perfect consistency all the time from a human being, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And so those sorts of things, sometimes you can chalk up to, hey, I've changed my view on this, or, just having a bad day or whatever. Right. And so I think we have to be careful. And I think you've done a good job of that, of being able to offer grace and understanding in those times when you can't see eye to eye with somebody, like in the case you just said, but yet still be brothers about it too, right? I think that's a lesson that the world needs sorely today, for sure.
Exactly. And that's kind of, it's, I don't know if you ever heard that joke about the story about the 5 blind man and the elephant, right? You ever heard that?
I haven't. I was sitting here going back thinking, well, tell me about it.
Okay. Well, there was 5 blind men. Man, I was hoping you heard it because it's been a long time since I've even thought about it. But I can get most of the points. There were 5 blind men filling an elephant, and they're all trying to convince each other what it was. And one grabbed the ear. They said, "Well, here's an elephant." So 5 blind men went in and started feeling the elephant, and one started feeling the ear, and he says, "Oh, an elephant's like a big old leaf. It's like a big flat leaf." And then the other blind man had the tail, and he's just like, "Oh, you're full of it. An elephant's like a rope." And then the other one had the tusk, and he's just like, "What? Like a rope? You're crazy. It's it's like a sharp spear." The one had the leg. It's like a tree trunk. And technically they're all right. If they would actually communicate with each other and learn from each other, they'd have the picture of what a real elephant looks like. And I feel like that's how a lot of times we are with God. We all have a piece of the truth, and we're so busy contending with each other that we don't realize that if we put all those pieces together, we could actually know what an elephant really is supposed to look like.
That I'm actually glad you told me that, because that, I think that definitely applies to fundamentalism. So often we get in these traps of thinking, no, we're right. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt what this is. But do we? I mean, the gospel's a pretty expansive thing, right? And for one guy outside of maybe some of those early brethren, I'm not sure any of us have a real good idea of what the complete picture looks like. And I think even the most humble among us who have tried to figure these things out, I think when the time comes when the whole plan is revealed, we're all going to be going like, well, I didn't see that one coming. And I think that's a healthy reminder of the fact that we all have a part to play.
Exactly.
And if we just do what the Lord has asked us to do, we'll be fine. I don't think I've ever shared this on the podcast. Maybe I have, but it reminds me of something that I came to about a year ago. And that was, it's funny. I started this podcast thinking I was doing something for somebody else. And what I found is it's been way more of a testimony builder to me than anyone else. As I started this podcast, I thought, man, we all have such varying different opinions about so many things. And I don't know how this is ever going to work. And I remember there was one night after I just had a great podcast, and I just got on my knees and I said a prayer of thanksgiving like I do every time I do one of these. And it kind of, I just had this idea and this thought that there's going to come a time where it's going to look pretty dark for all of us as Mormons. And if there's one thing I've learned from the scriptures, it's that God loves a dramatic ending. He loves a dramatic ending. And I think that like evil always does, Seth, I think evil's going to overplay its hand, and it's going to look like evil's going to win. And even evil is thinking he's going to win. And at that moment, God's just going to say, okay, everybody stand up. And we're all going to be doing our various parts and pieces. And when we stand up, the result's going to be as evil's going to find itself surrounded. And as we argue about all these things, or, who's the one and only, whose priesthood is valid and who's not, and we have all these questions, I think we'll be shocked to see who stands up in that day.
That's actually a perfect segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about. Okay. And that was, that night when I talked about, it was that powerful. It was definitely my second conversion.
Sure.
Because it was something. Okay, first I want to frame this, and I think I've hit this pretty good, but it can't be overstated. And it's kind of what you're saying. Because I ain't here trying to call people out to join anything, right? Mm-hmm. If you stay right where you are and you actually apply correct principles, then God will start moving in your life way more powerful than you thought possible. And the beginning of that is always repentance, right? Repentance, right. That deep level of repentance. But that, so going into that, and that's why that was so powerful, because we had people traveling 2,000 miles to go make something right. Like it wasn't just like, oh, I'm sorry, right? If they actually had someone that they felt like they had offended or done wrong, they took it serious and they went and found them, right?
Right.
Made it better, cleared it up, and so then you could be rebaptized, and then it was weird. It was powerful when you took it that serious.
Right.
And so, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, it's not about whether you're in the church or what group you're in. It's about how serious you are about applying these correct principles of the gospel that will work. Like God won't leave you hanging, right?
Right.
Anyways, so that was kind of the what was going on was taking this repentance real serious in that way, making everything right, looking deep inside your heart, trying to fix everything. And then when the Spirit stopped bringing things up to your remembrance of what you needed to make right, then going to baptism, come up, and then it was quite a powerful experience. And that's definitely what happened to me. So we talked about that night that I got baptized in the middle of the night and it was freezing cold. So much happened that night. The next morning I was just laying in bed pondering it, and then I remembered, oh yeah, I wrote something down from that meeting, from the tongues that had broke out, and it was Tuvia. And at the start of that night, kind of like I said, I'm very like cautious, and I remember my feelings perfectly. I was like, I'm going to trace this down and see if this is mumbo jumbo, right? Just blah, 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 or whether it actually means something, because different languages just sound like,
sure,
they don't sound like a language,
Sure.
And so I took out that I had written and I typed it in, and the first word was Tuvia, and it popped right up on Google. First thing that popped up, and it said Hebrew, a name, and it said meaning of the name, God is good.
Holy cow.
And that,
just so we're clear, you hadn't necessarily been schooled in Hebrew, right?
No, the trust me, none of us even knew what Hebrew looked like. And that's one thing I can, like, you bring up a good point, because people might think that this was this could be all orchestrated. There's like who this came through. I'm good friends with her, right? It's my wife's or my brother's wife.
Right.
And I know for a fact she doesn't know a stitch of Hebrew, not one word in Hebrew, and neither did I, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, and this was more powerful to me, just the first one, because only God knows what I've been struggling with. And for years, and I won't go into it, but in a nutshell, I felt like God told me this and this and this was going to happen, and then it didn't happen. And I felt like it really shook my faith, because it was a real curveball. And through life, a lot of things have happened, and I the question that kept coming to me, and I knew it wasn't right. Like I knew it was a bad spirit that kept bringing these on, but it just kept coming. Is God really good? Like he's not really good. Like he's cursing you, right? Like he continues to curse you. He continues to just not look after you. And in my mind, like I said, I knew they weren't right thoughts. And on one hand, you're just like, well, I know I'm a sinner, right? But on the other hand, it's just like, I'm really trying. Why is all this stuff happening to me? Is God good, or is he not good? And so the way that came to me was that's all I needed, because it was so personal to me. So it may not hit other people like it hit me, but it just answered that deep question I'd had for probably a year and a half. I'm fighting in my heart. Is God really good?
Right.
And it was just like, boom, God's good. Like, and I'm a very logical person. So things like, it's what this did to me is it made it to where I couldn't deny. Now you can decide whether it was a bad spirit or a good spirit, but something happened where information was conveyed, right?
Right.
And the information they conveyed, the very first word was God is good. That, and there's no explanation. There's literally no other way to explain it other than through the Spirit. Like Spirit manifested something.
Right.
And so I sent that back to my brother and his wife, and just like, hey, this is Hebrew and this is what I mean. And we thought that was kind of a testimony to us, because we were wondering, even Jessica, who was speaking it, she's wondering if it's a real language, right? Is it a real language, or is it just, she doesn't know. And so then once we knew it was Hebrew, I didn't really even worry about anything else. That was, God is good was good enough for me. But she ended up, once she knew the language, she ended up trying to trace down the rest of it, right?
Right.
Because it was a phrase that was said over and over again, Tovia, Sea, Kumo, Ayaha. And so she got back with about a week later and just like, hey, I kind of figured out what the rest of that said. And Asaiah, the next one is another easy one. It's another name. It's another Hebrew name. So Tavia Asaiah, and Asaiah is God has created, and Ha is basically behold or pay attention. And this is what stood me. What you said is Kum is basically stand or rise, to rise up, to stand up. It one meaning is to rise up against, right, a foreign enemy, to stand up, rise up. Basically, that's what it's, I guess, means.
Right.
So that's what triggered is Kum, stand up, arise. And then interesting, O is a symbol. It always precurses something before God's name. And here's the thing about Hebrew. So every letter means something too, right?
Right.
So you can break this down in a lot of different ways. Like you could make there's a ton of information packed in a little thing. But long story short, kind of what we had come up with, what it means is God is good, God created, rise up and stand for me. I am the living God. Wow. And so at that point, I had with what happened through the course of that night, and then kind of my experience of being actually freely, I guess, feeling actually forgiven and delivered. I didn't so much need this, and then it was just like the physical side, or the cherry on the top, right?
Right.
But it's interesting when we talk about patterns, because it's almost like we're struggling with our own Kirtland experience as well. And a few years have gone by, and it really helps. I think hindsight, I can really start seeing more and more, because I kind of said this, I always thought that God was going to be like, good job, you're a fundamentalist, you guys have the truth, and pat you on the back, and you could clean up a few things. But I never dreamed that he was gonna give me an Isaiah 1 experience. And I don't know if you're that's just been going in my head, and I probably should have got it to read it, but go read Isaiah 1, and he basically, it's like this. He says, your new moons, your Sabbaths, your assemblies, I hate them. Away with them, right? And that's kind of the information that we're getting. And so then, which I think Isaiah, understanding Isaiah, I think can really help us with these spiritual movements, right? Because what you end up having is how do you not throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Right.
And when I read Isaiah, I started reading Isaiah, and I wondered, how did they not throw out Moses, right?
Right.
Because Moses gave him, because he says your new moons, your Sabbaths, all your sacrifices. He says your incenses, they stink to my nostrils, right? And it's easy to read the Bible and think that you would make those connections, but if God says that to you, our natural instinct is to be like, oh, I mean, if we live back, oh, Moses must have been a false prophet. He gave us these, and God's saying he hates those, right?
Right.
But what is God really saying?
What he's really saying there, I think, is that in some ways they weren't digging deep enough. Right? They thought we hit this checklist, and we did the checklist, and we're good. Right?
Exactly.
And what God is saying, no, you're not understanding. I want your heart.
Exactly.
I want your heart. It's good that you did this checklist, right? But now you focus so much on this checklist that you've lost the meaning behind it. The checklist isn't the goal. The checklist is to bring you to your knees so that the Lord can really work with your heart now. Because, and I think as Mormons, we fall into this quite easily. And I don't care what stripe of Mormon you are, fundamentalist, mainstream, whatever. There's kind of a plan, right? And you work that plan. And sometimes the plan becomes the goal. And it should never be that goal. That plan is there to drive you to your knees, to get you to have that relationship with God that is really required to be Well, to make you a prophet unto your own house, right? Joseph Smith, I think, said that every man could be a prophet and talk to God. And that's what the Lord's trying to make us into. And if we're just working that checklist, Seth, I don't think, unless we're looking for the reason why we're doing the checklist, it's not enough. At least it's not for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He wants your heart. He wants a relationship.
Yeah, and that's the thing that end up stabbing me pretty hard. And is I started realizing that, and it's like it's weird, it's hard to say, but we are such an idolatrous people, right? We make anything an idol, and we make our ordinances idols, we make our temple idols, so all these things are tools to facilitate. Okay, and essentially is what God's saying is what we end up doing is we get married. So, and this is how I've worked it out in my mind, is the marriage covenant is important, and the wedding ring is important. The wedding ring is a token of the marriage. But it's what you had is so they're like, oh, God wants us to get married. So it's like, okay, I get the wedding ring and I make the commitments, and then they just treat the wife like trash, right? Like,
right.
See what I'm saying? They don't. Yep. So, and now we end up throwing the baby out of the bathwater in both camps, where on one side we end up saying, oh, it's all just about the heart and the relationship, and then, but we don't. The ceremony means nothing. You don't have to have a ceremony, right? And then the other side says, oh no, the ceremony is most important, and then they end up kind of neglecting the bride, right? I don't know if that's making sense.
It is. Yep. You're making perfect sense.
So that's a lot of I think when the spirit of God starts moving, and he will, right? Because God's the same yesterday, today, and forever, and it's not anything. Wherever you're at, if you get serious about it, the spirit will start moving. But then you're going to have to figure out. And this is, I think, why we're so afraid of spiritual movements, right? Because with every spiritual movement, you do have a Kirtland situation, right? You have the apostasy afterwards. But I think if we can figure out how to marry these two things together, and we have Isaiah to really help us, because later on in Isaiah he says, to the law and the prophets, anybody that speaks different than these, so this all comes into balance of tying both sides in, both halves, in the spiritual half and the physical half, the ordinances and the spirit. But you really have to start digging deep, and kind of what you're saying, well, what do these mean? What are these trying to get us to actually do? And then start doing those things, because ultimately that's what God said in Isaiah. Is he's just like, you're neglecting the sick, you're not taking care of the widows, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, if you're not understanding what these things are supposed to be doing inside your heart, then he ends up chastising you pretty hard about doing those things. And ultimately that's what we found, and ultimately that's what's been caused a ton of confusion. I mean, that's what happened to us, is we started getting chastised big time on, I mean, it sounded a lot like Isaiah 1. That's kind of what it is. And we're building a temple, and also just like, oh, God doesn't want ordinances, God doesn't want any of this, because when you start getting chastised by the Spirit, then it's real easy to, like I said, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Well, dude, look, you're doing something right. I mean, and I've been fascinated through this whole conversation, because in some ways, the folks out there have moved through like every significant moment within the restoration again, right? Setting up a community, building temples, having these manifestations like they had in Kirtland. And I mean, look, I think it shows that there's a humility there that the Lord recognizes he could work with. And that's awesome to see.
Yeah, and that's definitely one thing that's been extremely hard for me. And I gotta share this side of the story. I was visiting with a family member, and it's been so hard for me to not just say it's right or it's wrong, to actually, I mean, that's what I want to say. Oh, it's all right or it's all wrong. And I was visiting with one of my sisters. Like I said, when we first started, we're such a tight little circle. And it was obvious to me that she was throwing out things that I knew were true, right? That I had got a testimony of. And it's like I actually, because I'm kind of the type of personality that I'm just like, okay, if I decide to attack something with veracity or stand for something, it's like I do it wholeheartedly, right? And I was welling up. I was like, this is BS. I am so done with all of this. Like there's so much confusion. And kind of what I've explained with Isaiah has helped me, and a lot of things are becoming more and more clear as time goes on if we can patient enough. But at this point in my life, I was like, that's it. I'm hammered down. I'm done with this whole spiritual movement. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And this was all going on in my mind. I didn't speak it out right, but this is what's going on in my mind. Well, after we talked. We were visiting on the temple grounds with a bunch of the family was there. I went home, and my sister and brother-in-law, they could feel my energy building, and they were praying for me, and they came to me and they said, hey, look, the bottom line is we just got a strong answer that you're supposed to fast until God reveals to you what you're supposed to do, because what you're about to do is not there, right? And I knew they were right, because what you end up doing is we cut ourselves. That's all we do is we cut ourselves off from the Spirit. And if you pay attention, when you take the wrong move, you're just left to yourself to kick against the pricks, or that's honestly how it feels. And it's like every time I rise up to attack, the Spirit leaves me. And yet I have a testimony of some things. So I'm like, what? It was just been really hard. Anyways, I had a trip planned like in a week, and I was just like, oh, I want to be done with this fast. I knew that they're right. I'd been feeling like I needed to fast for a long time. And she's just like, hey, my brother-in-law and my sister they went to both separate ends of the house, they said, and they're both told, go talk to Seth. So, and it's like anything, if somebody says something that that the Spirit hasn't already told you, right, it doesn't mean too much. But it's like, I knew they were right. So anyways, I started this fast, and I tried to just, each week we kind of changed it. I guess I won't go into my personal feelings because I hate fasting, and she's like, I feel like they're like, I feel like it's going to be a long one. So I tried to prepare myself. Anyways, it was one of the best things I ever did. It was a fast each week. Wasn't fast off everything. Sometimes it's off everything. But through that fast, man, God really changed me even more. And I fall all the time, but every time he's basically saying, you need to stand for truth and do what you need to do and not attack people, right? Which has been really hard for me, because I want to attack things. But he's like, no, you need to lead out, I guess, is ultimately what I came away with. Is like, you need to lead out. You need to stand up and lead out, and people will come or they won't. That's not your job to, I guess, compel people anywhere, right? Like, set a good example, let your light shine. And if you have something, then they'll flow, right? People are starving, and if you have something, then it'll attract. And like says, even knowing all that, I haven't figured out how to accomplish it exactly, but it definitely changed the way I have to just let people go and let them, because sometimes experience is the best teacher, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, that really, after that, it's, I think that we're going to see, I guess, a lot more clarity. I'm already seeing a lot more clarity. If we're patient enough, we take the Spirit and we take the scriptures and we harmonize things together, and we let the scriptures help us understand what God's trying to say. It just takes both, right? You can't just grab a hold of the scriptures or grab a hold of just what God's saying. Like, it kind of takes both to keep you going somewhat straight across the sea, so to speak. So that's what I'm trying to do in my life. And but I can promise anybody, if you start the steps and you find the repentance, you find the humility, and you actually humble yourself down low enough, like, God will speak to you. He will. You just have to learn how to hear him. But after he starts doing that, then a lot of confusion can set in too.
Right.
But it's worth it, right? Because you're dead. It ends up being a dead gospel without actual that connection with the heavens, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah,
and ultimate.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, ultimately bringing it back full circle with kind of start with is I think that's what truly Zion will be, is when everybody is keeping themselves in check, because they're like, oh, I just offended the Spirit, right? Like the Spirit just left me, and then nobody has to. At that point, God is the literal king of the wherever you're at, right? Because you're accountable to the Spirit, and you've created a sensitive heart to be able to hear it. And ultimately, that's I think what we're really interested in trying to create here is that where, and that's kind of interesting enough, kind of what you said is, everybody just trying to follow the Spirit and do the right thing and work together in a very organic way, and let God lead. Because if he's not leading, if it's men, right, who's interested? I know I'm not interested in a group of men or a man doing anything. If we're not following God, then I'm not interested. So I think that's got to be at the forefront of our hearts is God is the king, and we exalt him, and everything is to point to him. Everything he has us do is to help us build that relationship with each other and with him, I guess, if that makes sense. So that's a long way around. I guess that's kind of my testimony, maybe getting preachy here, but anyway, that's pretty much what I had with that is for one, I want to make it clear that it's not about come here or go there. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you start applying the right ingredients and live at what the gospel teaches, then you're gonna have results, right?
Right.
And I guess that's one thing that my grandpa instilled in me. And when I said I looked up to him, it's funny. I need to clarify that, because the thing that I loved about him the very most was when he'd speak, he made me believe that I could hear God. That God could speak to me. And that took a long time for me to be able to hear. But in the end, I learned that it wasn't God's problem. It was my problem, right? God's always speaking. We just can't hear him because we have stiff necks and hard hearts, right? That, like, those scriptures just keep beating on me, stiff necks and hard hearts. And that's what I'm trying to, if I could leave anything with your listeners, it would be that God can absolutely speak to you, right? And I guess I'd try to pass on what my grandpa passed on to me is no matter who you are. This is what he said with his first it wasn't his first experience, but with King Springs. He always said, God called me and he knew my name. And he'd always say, he knows your name. Like that was quite powerful to him. And the way he expressed it was always powerful to me. Like, he knows your name. So whoever you are, he knows your name, which is quite special.
Yeah.
And the gospel works. If you apply the right ingredients, you're going to start getting results. But with us, or at least with me, and we have always been really different, even than a lot of the other circles. But even I was surprised at still how chastising God was. Like, you guys got to get your hearts right. Like, there's too much idolatry, and I didn't think we had any, right?
Right.
But we did, and I think that's the biggest thing that was facing me is idolatry. Things for one, sins that not knowing how to truly be free of my sins.
Right.
And then for two, just a hard heart, a stiff neck, and idolatry, things in the place, good things you think are good. And God's like, you got to move it all out. You got to put him very first, I guess.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there was a couple things you mentioned in there that resonated with me. One was this idea that we have to attack, right? And look, we need to stand for principle. We need to stand for truth. But we don't necessarily need to attack. I go back to Gandhi, who his people were oppressed. And look, I'm not saying Gandhi was a perfect individual. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that he was very cognizant of using Christ as an example of peaceful, non-violent resistance. And what that did is that won people to his side. He wasn't a weak man. He didn't just back down to the British. But what he did do is that he stood peacefully. And sometimes that's all it takes. And Seth, I can identify with what you were feeling so much. There are so many times that I'm so thankful I have the wives I do to temper me, because I am the first guy that's like, grab the spear and the shield, let's kick down the door and let's go. Right. And they're like, well, maybe that's not the best tact here. Right. And so
exactly.
And so they keep me honest, and they keep me humble, and I'll forever be grateful and love them for that, for sure. But that's not often what's needed. Sometimes you just have to stand. Right.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's been really hard to me is it's amazing how hard it's been for me to, and I fail every day. So anybody thinks that they're like, oh, that's a hypocrite. I fail every day to know how to stand and share share truth that God's given you, and yet not, just go and attack, is actually extremely hard to do. At least for me, I automatically turn into to attack and condemning,
right,
instead of just letting your light shine and planting seeds and let the seeds grow. So
yep, absolutely, dude, beautiful stuff. You got anything else?
I think that's it, Dave. I think that's all I got. So
perfect. All right, well, that's awesome. Seth, you're the man. I appreciate you so much, buddy.
You too. Thank you, Dave.
All right, bye, everybody.